Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee, and welcome to those watching online. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs. Please do not use the lifts. Please assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise you when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? I would advise that speakers using the microphones are picked up by the cameras recording the meeting. Members of the public in the public gallery behind the speakers may be picked up by those cameras and have their images captured. Any member of the public who objects to the possibility of being filmed may wish to take this opportunity to move or leave the meeting. Would everyone present please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and that they are not used to make or receive calls or messages in the chamber whilst this meeting is in progress. I have the following members who wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1. Item AO2, Councillor Wright. Items AO2 and D10, Councillor Smith. Item RO9, Councillor Curry. And items 4D and 4E, Councillor Davies. Would any other members who wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1 please announce it now? No, thank you. The following applications have been reserved for public speaking. Item 4A, 221 Beacon Road, Broadstairs. Item 4B, Who Farm, 147 Monkton Road. Items 4D and 4E, which both relate to the former Port Control East Pier, Ramsgate. Item 4I, 223 to 227 North Down Road, Margate. Item 4J, land between 47 and 49 Rose Gardens, Minster, Ramsgate. And item 4K, land to the north of Fairlawn Road and the west of Northwood Road, Broadstairs. I don't have any apologies at the moment. Can I just check that is still the case? No. And I have a declaration of interest. Councillor Rattigan.
Item 4K. No, sorry. 4F.
Thank you. We will come to the procedure for that when we get to that item. Do members agree that minutes of the Planning Committee meeting held on the 18th of October be approved as a correct record? Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Bayford and seconded by Councillor Alban. Do members agree? Agreed. Thank you. Just a reminder, any site visits will take place for committee members on the morning of Friday, the 1st of December. So, moving on to public speaking. First item, AO1 221 Beacon Road. Speaking against the application, I have first Mr. Steve Nicholson. You have 3 minutes.
I'm Steve. I live at 223, one half of the semi in question. The application is for a loft conversion, in itself unextraordinary. Many people do it. We have no issues if that was all that it was. However, it's also an application for a second-storey extension onto the rearward projecting part of the property. The top of this extension was designed to be lower than the eaves of the main house, and when you enter any room in it, you will step down into the room. This enabled it to be lower than the eaves. This is because these extensions were never intended to overshadow or infringe their own garden, neighbouring gardens, or neighbouring properties, and that's us. An additional storey on top of this will be a huge impact on our day-to-day life, as it overshadows the entirety of our property at the rear. The only way to maintain it will be from the roof of our side of the extension. Our ground floor dining room and our first floor office will be kept in permanent shadow. So in our opinion, it's at odds with the original design of the house. It's out of character with every other loft extension in the street. It overshadows our garden, overshadows our study and our dining room. The side wall can only be maintained and accessed from the top of our roof. Most of the houses that face back into the square formed by all the gardens are Victorian builds of the same or very similar age and design. And although many have loft conversions, not one of them has built a second storey on the rear-facing extension. So this would be entirely out of place with the character and appearance of the garden scene. But it is the infringement of the use and enjoyment of our garden, our dining room and our study that we feel is the biggest impact of the second storey extension. So we oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just get you to turn your microphone off, please? Thank you. The Principal Planning Officer, Emma, will now outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. This is the application site here outlined in red. So this is Beacon Road. You can see the area here with the dark shading is the proposed extension. This is an aerial view of the site. So again, it's this property here. So you can see that the area to the rear is surrounded by properties. So there's no external views of the rears of these properties. And then another view of the property. So this is the property on the left-hand side here with the red dot above it. So it's a pair of semi-detached properties. That's 2-storey in height, and you can see at the rear there's a rear projection into the garden, given its traditional historic design. This is taken from the rear, so the rear elevation of the existing building. So again, the application property is on the right-hand side here, and the adjoining property on the left is the property of the neighbour that we've just heard speak. So you can see from this view that the garden of the property, the application property itself, is smaller, so the neighbouring property wraps round to the rear of their property. And then this is some photos taken from the rear looking towards it. So the application site is on the right-hand side here. So again, the right-hand side of this pair of semis. You can see in terms of looking around at neighbouring properties that there's quite a few dormer windows that already exist. This is a closer view of it. So you can see again the neighbour has a Velux window high up within the roof space, and the windows being referred to are where there's concern regarding light is this window here, which the neighbour has confirmed is a study window. And then again, this is just some views of some neighbouring properties. So again, the application property is on the right-hand side of this photo, and again you can see a number of neighbouring properties have all extended into the roof with dormer windows. And then again to the other side, so the application property is on the left-hand side of this screen, and again you can just see some of the existing properties. There's fewer dormer extensions along the right-hand side here. Then just a view from the front, so again the application property is on the left-hand side here. So the proposal will involve the hip to gable extension at roof level with some Velux windows within the front roof slope. The original application did include a dormer window at the front, but the application has been amended to remove the dormer, so it is now solely for Veluxes in the front roof slope. And then again, just a view of the front there. So these are the existing elevations on the left-hand side. You can see the existing front elevation and rear elevation. And this is the proposal. So the left-hand side, again, is the front elevation. You can see the hip to gable extension with the 2 Velux windows within the roof slope. And on the right-hand side, you can see the proposed rear elevation. So what's proposed is a flat roof dormer window within the roof space with some French doors and balconette. And then this is a second floor extension that extends above the rear projection that already exists. So this line here is the existing roof slope, and you can see this is a full depth flat roof extension above that element. This is the existing side elevation. So again, this is the existing projection that comes out from these properties. And then this is the proposal with the extension above that rear projection and the dormer window in the roof space. And then this is the other side proposed elevation. So again, you can see the dormer window, and then this element here is the proposed extension. And here you can see the neighbouring pitch roof above their rear projection. This is the existing floor plans. So ground floor level is not changing. First floor level, this is the existing rear projection, and then this is the existing roof. So the main change is this central floor plan here, where you can see the extension coming out at second floor level to create an ensuite provision of ensuite above the existing rear projection. And this area here is the dormer window with the French doors and balconette, which will create a bedroom within the roof space. So the concern from the neighbours regarding the impact on light to their windows. So as you can see from this photo, the extension would extend in this area here. So in terms of the impact on the neighbour's windows, there's a distance of 3 metres from the side elevation of the rear extension to the side of their window, and so 3.3 metres to the central point of their window. In terms of outlook, you can see that their existing rear projection already extends beyond their window and causes a loss of outlook to that window. So the only real issue is whether there's significant harm from loss of light to that window to warrant a refusal of the application. The neighbouring property is southwest of the property, so there will be some loss of light from this extension at roof level. But given the distance and the location of this, it's not considered that it's not going to have a significant impact on light. And as you saw from some previous photos, there's already loss of light, again, from the existing rear projection on that window. The Velux window is quite high up within the roof space. There's not been any confirmation of what room this window serves. It's not clear whether this is a habitable room. It may well be loft space, I'm not sure. But again, because this is quite high up within the roof space and it's angled, it's not going to have much outlook or from that window already. So the creation of an extension above this space is not considered to result in significant harm to the outlook or light into that window. This is a photo that the neighbour has submitted as part of their objection, so just so you can see the impact from their Velux window and the impact of it. Again, the extension would be in this location here, extending up along the central parapet. So if you were looking right out of the window, there probably would be some loss of outlook. But again, if being the height of the window within the roof space and the fact it's got quite a high sill, you wouldn't expect to have normal loss of light or outlook from inside that room looking out. So it's considered that the impact on the neighbour is on balance acceptable. And in terms of the character of the area, given the fact it's on the rear of the property and it is surrounded, as you can see from this photo, by existing properties and there's no real views in, whilst it is not particularly characteristic of what's around there in terms of the fact there's no other properties that have extended at this level, it's not considered there's a justification to actually refuse it on the visual impact of it, given the fact there's limited views from outside private gardens in this location. So it's recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. And I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. And who would like to speak? Councillor Bright.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm on the Planning Committee at Broadstairs Town Council, where this application was recommended for refusal based on the impact on the neighbour. After listening to the officer's report, I still don't think that the loss of light and loss of privacy have been suitably addressed. It seems to me like it is a very large extension, and I do wonder whether, I mean, there's nothing else like it along that row, and I do worry that this is going to be impacting significantly on the neighbours. So therefore I was wondering whether it would be possible to request a site visit. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Keane.
Thank you. I'm also concerned about the loss of light for the neighbour, so I would, be in support of a site visit.
Thank you. Councillor Matterface.
Thank you, Chair. As Ward Councillor, I did call this in for exactly the same reasons that Councillor Bright has mentioned. There are no other properties along that stretch with anything other than a simple dormer window. And I feel, because of the way those gardens are, those houses face east-west, so the gardens are going north-south. I think a large part of the light onto the rear garden of 223 the sun would certainly not get into the bulk of their garden. The speaker did mention loss of light to habitable room, including the dining room and the study, and I would have thought that would have been sufficient cause for concern to maybe give this some consideration. A site visit has been proposed, and I would like to see if that could be voted on.
Thank you. Councillor Wing.
I won't go over loss of light, thank you, Chair, but is there any chance we could go back to the rear view of the whole run of houses? Because although you said there's dormer type, dormer-type developments there, I couldn't see a dormer-type roof that comes out over a projection. So this would be a first incident of actually creating something that actually goes beyond the roof area. So I think for me that's a bit too far. It detracts from the character that we've already got, and there are some dormers, but there aren't dormers that project out the back. And also, has there been any consideration about the extra runoff the neighbour will get if the rain is driving in a certain direction up against that sheer wall that they're going to have? I don't know whether there's any indication of extra plumbing that would take that water back round to the person who's built the extension or not, but it is a considerable problem when you live in a house that's got higher walls either side of you. I live in such a property, and water runoff is a real problem when you've got rain hitting the larger building to one side of you. So I would support a site visit to get a better understanding of it, but for me that extra bit sticking out is just an extension too far. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alban.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say that the extension, the second story extension is rather odd. It doesn't fit in with the rear elevation of the property at all, in my humble opinion. I don't see a need for a site visit. You could see the impact that this is going to have on the next door property, and I think if the applicant was to come back with a different application for another second story extension that fits in with the property, then that would be a lot better. I mean, as it stands at the moment, or it doesn't stand at the moment as it happens, Chair, but I can't support this application. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Matterface.
If I could just come back, as been mentioned, the three properties on the left with the two dormer windows, they're new. They were infill a few years ago, so they are actually very modern. And one of them does have a loft extension, which she put in. In the photograph at the back of the property, if you could bring that back, the bit that you can see on the back is actually the bathroom, because those houses were built without bathrooms. So what is seen sort of directly above the red car there, they're actually bathrooms on the first floor. But as Councillor Alban said, this is going to be an extra floor above that, which is, I would consider slightly out of balance with the rest of the houses there.
Thank you. Councillor Makin.
Can we see the orientation somewhere, please? So to see whether I can see a shadow, but see how much light gets to those windows. So is that north-south? Yeah. So the front of the house faces southeast, is that right?
Sorry, this is correct in terms of the orientation. So the extension is in this location here, so southwest of the neighbour's rear projection.
Sorry, who's it? Oh, Councillor Moore, thank you.
Yes, good evening, Chair, and thank you. Could I just ask Mr Livingston that this application doesn't contravene any planning criteria at the moment? Therefore, if the committee were of a mind to try and refuse this, and this went to appeal, there's a good chance that the applicant could win that.
So the two main issues that have been raised so far, one is a character and appearance point, which is a matter of judgment that members could exhibit something different from officers. I think from our perspective, the view that you're seeing is from that parking area that you can see in the image that's there. Obviously, that is used limitedly in terms of by people in the wider public realm. Our main concerns with the dormer windows at the front, which were removed, is because everyone would see them and they're out of character. So there is a judgment about, even though this is clearly an extension that is different from any other extension there, because it's on top of a structure, it's effectively a second floor, with the dormer windows mostly found at the rear, it's not got a lot of visibility. So our concern would be that would be something the inspector would take into account. In terms of the relationship with the neighbouring property, again, a very relevant consideration in terms of whether or not there is a loss of light or sense of enclosure caused. Again, our judgment is because of the distance that's there, even though the orientation means that there will be an impact on light because the neighbour's sort of to the northeast of this extension, because of that gap that's there, it's not considered that that would be sufficient from our perspective to refuse the application. But it's not to say it wouldn't be unreasonable to make a different decision from that if there was a consideration. It would be the sort of thing that I think would be, if the motion to approve were to fall, I think it would be beneficial for members to visit the site if they were going to look to refuse it on the impact on the neighbour. To Councillor Alban's point, the impact on the character and appearance of the area, you can really make a judgment, I would argue, from what you can see, and this image in particular, about how much you would be able to see from that specific parking area as opposed to from the wider public realm.
Can I add my own question, which links into Councillors Moore? Permitted development rights. What is the situation regarding permitted development rights?
So the extension on top of the accretion is the element which definitely needs planning permission. I don't think we have a calculation in terms of the hip to gable and then the dormer window. On its own, subject to a few provisos, I would anticipate they would be able to do a roof extension without needing planning permission, but it wouldn't be the design that you can see. It's that second floor extension is the bit that triggers the need for the application.
Do I have any other questions or comments?
I'd like to support Councillor Alban's suggestion that if we're of a mind to refuse this, we're actually just suggesting to the applicant that they need to think again and maybe scale back, which is, something a lot of people have to do when they submit planning applications. They have to go away and think again or choose to appeal. So we're batting the ball back in their court, if you like, because we have some concerns in certain areas.
Thank you. Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think I agree with what most people have said. I'm torn because I feel that the distances mentioned with the overhang probably would render it acceptable, but it cannot be denied that it does look out of place with other properties. I can't really see the point of a site visit. I can't see what that would tell us. So I think, personally, I think I'd probably go for straight refusal in the hope that they'll come back with something more acceptable. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? No, in that case, we will now put the motion for the officer's recommendation for approval to the vote. Could I have those in favour, please? And those against? The motion is lost. Just bear with us a moment. Oh, sorry, did the abstentions? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you. Apologies for that.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously we've heard the different points and the points of concern. So the options for members in terms of anyone wanting to propose a motion would be, one, to go for a site visit, or if a member wants to propose a motion for refusal on particular grounds, then if that were to be the case, then I think it would be worth doing an adjournment, but it just depends on what members want to do and who wants to get the chair's attention first, really.
Councillor Orban.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Yeah, I propose refusal of this application. Happy to come and talk to Mr. Livingstone on the reasons why, if he feels that would be the best way forward. But certainly, I think the second story extension is bulky. I think it's out of character with the rest of with the house, and there are. I must admit, I do go slightly along with what Councillor Bayford has said about the loss of light. I think there's already loss of light there through the current how it currently sits, but I think we could include that in there as well. So that would be the basis that I would be looking at, unless Mr. Livingstone has got any other comments, Chair. Thank you.
Just bear with us a moment. All right, just going to bring Mr. Livingstone back in for a moment.
Thank you, Chair. So just to go through those points specifically before a member may wish to second that and then put that to the vote. So in terms of the development being out of character due to its scale and bulk specifically, so the policy is QDO2, the local plan, which is a character and appearance of the area. So that reason would be one that would be sort of elaborated on, but those tenets are quite core in the motion. That's fine. Just on the point with regards to the loss of light, I think, just to clarify, the reasons need to stand on their own. So there would be two separate reasons. They both need to be justifiable. In terms of that reason, if it was a concern that there would be a loss of light to the neighbouring property, which would result in significant harm to their living conditions, then again, that is a matter of judgment, obviously, but it needs to be, I just wanted to frame it in a slightly different way rather than the adding it on. It needs to stand on its own, and members need to be aware that they will be judged independently. It will not be done as one thing because it's a different policy. So that's QDO3 of the local plan. So if Councillor Orban is happy to put the motion on those two grounds, then it would be about a seconder.
I'm happy with that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, do I have a seconder for Councillor Orban's motions? Councillor Bright. Okay, before I go to the vote on that, we have had 4 people mention that they would like a site visit. If you want a site visit, you have to vote against Councillor Alban's motion, and then we will go to another motion that would be to have a site visit. I'm very aware that there are a number of councillors that haven't spoken and indicated if they actually want a site visit. So, just a reminder, it's a straight refusal under the conditions that we've said. Who would agree with that? Okay, that's carried. But who was... Do you want the against? Yeah, we'll have the against. Anyone against? And any abstentions? Thank you.
Yeah, that's carried.
So that motion is now carried. Thank you. Okay, ready for the next one? Right, moving on to the next item, which is item AO2, Who Farm, 147 Monkton Road, Minster. For initially, we have speaking under Councillor Rule 20.1, Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. This application was originally taken in 2004 to 2020. It included the provision of a usable pedestrian connection to the footway in Monkton Road. This is described as a critical requirement to the sustainability of the development. A drawing, there is a drawing which is reference 2019/35001, was submitted for an effective 1.2 footway
with a condition to be put in place to be completed before the construction began. It was the responsibility of the applicant to seek consent and liaise with KCC. KCC has confirmed that this has not happened. However, the footpath has been rushed through, causing much anger to the residents of the area due to the ripping out of an established hedgerow and loss of habitats to provide access between two developments on the land with uncertain ownerships. In September 23, the applicants have made no attempt to comply with the grant of consent for the Loo Farm or obtain any changes during the past 4 years until now. But what they want, want the planning committee and the planners to agree to what has no relevance to what was applied for, and ignoring the fact that TDC enforcement have commenced action for non-compliance in May. KCC have since made a quote, the idea of installing 4 sets of gates and use them at your own risk is ridiculous. Finally, with no certainty of the future upkeep of this unauthorised footpath and the impact of the obstructive and encroaching vegetation which therefore I believe this goes against Thanet local plan, the application should be refused and the enforcement recommendations, the applicant required to comply with the conditions 18, and subsequently there's another one, condition 2. This request to refuse is also supported by Minster Parish Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Second, also speaking under Council Rule 20.1, Councillor Smith, at 3 minutes.
Thank you. Do we stand? No? All right. Don't like you that much. At the risk of repeating some of Councillor Wright's statements, the promised footway is a critical requirement to the Who Farm redevelopment's sustainability. The developer appalled local residents by tearing up many yards of prized hedgerow and increasingly rare hedgerow to construct a footpath in the wrong location and to inferior standards. It is not acceptable that 4 years after the original planning application, it cannot guarantee safe and secure passage for pedestrians. Residents village residents are accustomed to walking along Monkton Road, which links Monkton to Minster. It is a narrow and potentially dangerous road to pedestrians. Traffic has increased markedly due to developments in recent years, and this development will increase it further. If it becomes a private footway, which appears to be the trajectory, the development's residents will inherit responsibility for its upkeep, and that will be much harder to enforce. Minster's population has a high proportion of retired people, and the risk of injury should not be ignored in order to save the developer money and trouble. At your own risk signs, transfer liability from the constructor to the pedestrian, but it does nothing to mitigate the risk of injury. KCC Highways commented that a footpath between the site and the existing footway on Monkton Road has been constructed, albeit without entering a Section 278 agreement with KCC Highways. Having visited the site, it is evident that the footpath is not constructed to adoptable standards due to its alignment and levels. This planned feature was originally subject to a Grampian condition, so should have been completed as per the approved plans before construction began, whereas the show home opened to the public last weekend with no such feature in place. The developer claimed that it could not construct the approved footpath because it wasn't sure who owned the embankment. To this, I would reply that that there is a clear procedure for establishing ownership and for overriding it if unclaimed, and B, the very same embankment was flattened to create farm access just a few metres along the road. After complaints from local residents, TDC's planning enforcement officer informs the developer that they were not compliant in May 2023. Since then, rather than finish the project to an acceptable standard or remediate the problem, I'm so nearly done, the developer has sought retrospective permission to proceed as is. My conjecture is that the home planning consultancy allowed the developer to believe that this inferior offering would be granted permission retrospectively. I just hope that the planning committee will prove them wrong.
Thank you. Thank you. The Principal Planning Officer, Annabelle, will now outline the report.
Sorry, apologies. Apologies, Chair. This is the application site outlined in red. And this is Who Farm, the development that was approved in 2020, sits in this location here. So this is a Google image of the site, so that the development would be the residential development that's been referred to and approved in 2020 sits in this location here, and a footpath would runs along here to join the existing footpath that exists towards Minster. As has been set out in the report and in speakers' presentations, planning permission was granted in 2020 for the construction of 23 dwellings in this area here. For the construction of, 23 dwellings after the demolition of existing buildings in this location. And this permission did include the provision of a 0.9 metre wide footpath to provide an eastern link from that residential development to the existing footpath heading towards Minster there on that same side of the road. This plan is from the 2019 application, which was approved in 2020, and the footpath proposed was to run along between points X and Y on this plan. This is also the plan from the 2020 application, and it shows the layout of that footpath. So it would be, at that time, was proposed to run alongside Monkton Road and be 0.9 metres wide. But following the grant of that consent, the applicants found that there was insufficient highway verge to create the footpath in that location, and some of the land required was in fact unregistered. So the applicant has created a footpath which is 1.2 metres wide, which does connect the residential development, which is, as members may well know, is actually under construction currently, to the existing footpath. For most of its length, it is actually set back 2 metres from the road, and it is at a higher level for some of it than the highway. I'll just show you some photographs that were actually taken today of the footpath. So this is where it starts here. This is the access into the development, and this is where the footpath that's been created starts. So we're walking along, obviously heading down towards Minster, so you get an idea of the footpath, and you get some idea that it is slightly higher here than the Monkton Road. Another view, some members can see it is surfaced, but I mean, you can see as well, as you can move further along, there are some instances where it's not a straight footpath, it does bend, and there are some changes in levels as you go along. Not necessarily significant changes in level, but it isn't even and flat. And that's a viewpoint where it does join the existing footpath that there, and you can see the change of level as you walk down towards that footpath. And you can also see there that it is higher than the Monkton Road. So this is the plan as it's currently the footpath that's currently being built out. There is a tiny bit missing because it started, you can just see it there. It doesn't go all on this plan, it doesn't completely show it going to the access. This is the farm access that's been mentioned that's constructed, and as members can see as you walk down it, it does vary slightly in sort of bend a bit, and as you've seen from the photographs, it does vary in height, and you step down to it. And as has been mentioned, it's set further away from Monkton Road than was originally approved in the 2020 application. So this is the proposed plan, which would be the finished footpath that's being proposed by the developers. There would be 4 gates put in, so one as you enter, this is the actual entrance we saw in the photographs to the development. There would be a gate here into the footpath and gates either side of the farm access, and there will be a further gate where it joins the existing footpath. And there would be signage on those gates that actually talk about the fact that it is not an adopted footpath for KCC, but it would give contact details of the ownership and details for people to contact to deal with them. But it also will set out that it is a public footpath and the gates will not be locked, so it is available for everyone to use the footpath. Just to give you an idea, this is the sort of gate that's been proposed, so it is a sort of traditional gate you might find in the countryside, and as mentioned, they wouldn't be locked or chained in any way. But they would need to be pushed open. It is really just to define that that is not normal KCC adopted footpath pavement network. So, as has been mentioned, KCC Highways have stated that due to its alignment and changes in levels, that they would not adopt the footpath as part of their network, but they do not object to consent being granted for the proposal, subject to conditions that have been set out in the report. And it is considered that with the changes in level and alignment and the gates having to be pushed and opened and closed, that it doesn't resemble a traditional sort of foot pavement you would see just adjacent to a road, and it probably has more of an appearance of a sort of public right-of-way, which might have stiles or gates and things like that, but it is considered not to be a problem in terms of character and appearance because given its countryside location. There is no adverse impact on residential amenities on surrounding occupiers from the footpath or its gates and signage that were proposed. And whilst it is accepted that some users may find the footpath difficult to access and use, given the gates and changes in levels, but many users will be able to use the footpath as an alternative to walking in the highway. It will be publicly available, and officers do consider there are sufficient safeguards in the conditions that are going to be imposed if members were to grant the consent for maintenance, etc., and the footpath to be kept clear of vegetation. And so the officer recommendation is for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. We will now debate it. Do I have any? I've got loads of hands. So I saw Councillor Keane first. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, the look of the footpath to me looked fine, but I think the gates are a big problem. We should be thinking about accessibility, and I'm not sure how accessible it is for someone in a wheelchair, for a mum pushing a buggy, if you've got to open and close gates along it. So I'm concerned about that. I presume that what was originally proposed didn't have gates. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Thank you. So, as I say, that to me is the main problem.
Councillor Driver.
Thanks. If we say no, it's a question actually. If we say no, what happens?
do they demolish it or build a new one?
That was my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, if the application is refused, then obviously the applicant has the ability to appeal the decision. If it's if it's not appealed, indeed, as soon as the decision is made, and if it was to be refused, then it basically passes back to enforcement, and then obviously members being concerned as they are, then we would look to potentially then serve a notice to basically return the land to its previous state, because the development that's here that they've done that requires planning permission is the laying of a hard surface. There is a related application, but it is an independent application which is in with the council at the moment, which is to vary the conditions on that original planning permission to remove the requirement for the footpath in its previous location. So obviously one decision could knock on to the other in terms of what we do with that. It's obviously difficult to predict whether or not someone would appeal a refusal. Obviously, in this instance, though, I would sort of bet on that occurring. I think that's fair to say, given the fact that this would, require. It sort of affects two different things. It's not just the development that's happened. It's also then the fact that you still need to provide a footpath for that residential development. So there are a couple of knock-ons that would happen in that event.
Councillor Matterface.
Can you tell me what is the difference between a footway and a footpath, or are they the same terms? Because in the document it refers to footway, but on the drawing it says footpath, and this is a public footpath which traditionally is maintained by the owner of the land anyway. So the people who would be living in the property would have to maintain it if they want to keep it as private land. Is that correct?
No. So the footway footpath interchangeable in this aspect. It's not defining anything particular. So a couple of the conditions that are proposed pick up some of the bits that you raised about maintenance, and I do appreciate this is a concern about actually something going on to the residents that could, that puts an inference that they need to do something on that. So the conditions that we put on are effectively to ensure that the conditions need to be complied with by the owner of the land. In this instance, obviously there's an ownership element that has changed to allow for the footpath to be constructed. And the conditions would be enforceable against the owner of the land rather than, in this instance, the residents, for example. Maintenance is one thing that's covered in this condition. I think is it 3 or this is 3?
Condition 3. Yeah.
And as well as that, there's the added point in that condition about making sure that the footpath is open and kept available for use. The condition which is before that is removing permitted development rights, because there's a quirk of the system that could mean that you could put a gate up which is locked without needing consent under that, which is why we're taking away that permitted development right just in case. The point of the conditions is to follow up from the highways comments, and it's whilst obviously I appreciate the concerns that highways are raising are kind of covering the point that they're not adopting this, and therefore people need to be aware that they aren't the responsible body for the maintenance of it. The point here is that we need a footpath to connect this residential development, and that this application needs to be considered on its own merits. I think, certainly the planning department's view is if we were making a decision between one or the other, there was a reason why we granted it in one place. But that's not the judgment that we have to make, and that's not the judgment for members. It's not an either or. It's is this acceptable as it is on its own merits? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. The gates, which are going to be like country gates, 4 gates on a path that's not that long. I mean, it does seem a bit of overkill. I mean, I do lots of country walking. It'd be unusual to have a gate on a footpath like that that's not sort of a farmer's field type of thing.
If I may come back on that, the reason why there are 4 gates, there's one at each end, but it's that you can see the 2 there. It's because of that farm access. So it's a safety point that the 2 that are there are to delineate the access directly onto the farm for vehicles. There's another one that's off shot to the right of the image, or the east of the image. Yeah.
Okay, I have Councillor Moore next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the original application was a 0.9 metre pathway, and the developer's given us a 1.2 metre pathway, which is obviously wider. Some of the objections were saying that it's uneven. Is that uneven because of the way that the contours are and it's tarmacked, or is it just it's poorly laid? And are we really just objecting, or are the objectors objecting just the fact that the footpath has gates on it and that there's no ownership? They're the criteria questions, I think. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll carry on. Thank you, Chair. In terms of the contours, there has been a change to the contours of the land. I don't think we're not in a position to say whether or not it's been done in a particular way because of just the contours. Although clearly that land was not level originally. So, and there is deviation because of the length of it. There is deviation along. There's an element of up and down. There is also an element of side to side as you move to the actual access points when it goes to that farmer's gate access. So there is that change. I think in terms of the objections that have been made have raised a number of points, and I think a number of concerns about that this is, from residents' perspective, far from ideal. I think in comparison to what was originally required by the planning application. The application has submitted the reasoning behind why this has transpired, but again, I think that's for context, but it's still, again, in its own way, it still needs to be looked at on the basis of the merits of what's been proposed, rather than, again, that either or, and why they say they couldn't do what they've done because of unregistered land. It just needs to be looked at on its own basis. The gates are a point of objection, but I think there are numerous points of objection that have been raised.
Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. My first question's been answered about the purpose of the gates, but I feel it's not unreasonable for a country footpath to be slightly uneven. It's a very strange question, but how unsafe would it be to actually walk along the road, for example, for a wheelchair or somewhere? Is it a very busy road? Is it unsafe to do that? Yes.
I think there's a reason why there's a need for a footpath between the housing development that's there. Obviously, there are properties in and around Hoof Farm at the moment which are all, which have been in place for a number of years, and obviously didn't have footpath connection. But obviously, specifically, one of the requirements of us approving the housing development was to ensure that we were trying to provide safe pedestrian access.
Councillor Garner.
Thank you. So just to recap on this application, so we got a developer who sought permission to build 23 houses, and after much to and fro between KCC highways, between planning officers, they brought an application to planning committee in May 2020, which was approved with a number of conditions, one including to create a certain type of footpath in a certain place along the side of that road. It seems the developer has, off their own bat, ignored that condition and decided to build a footpath somewhere else in a different place, which resulted, among other things, in loss of hedgerow, and I think that's without consultation with the planning authority. This led to a number of residents in the local area complaining about it, and enforcement were persuaded to get involved. So the developer has now submitted a retrospective application in the hope that this planning committee now will just ignore the previous planning committee's approval and conditions they made and let them get away with it. Let them do what they want to do rather than what they were conditioned to do. And I don't think that's good enough. And I don't think we can be seen to be just, what is the point of passing planning applications with serious conditions in them that we want developers to do, if they can then just ignore it and then come back to us and say, we've ignored it, we've done what we wanted to do, now we want you to give us permission to do something differently. I don't think we should do that, and I, after listening to what others have been saying, I will be voting to refuse permission for this.
Thanks, Chair. Just to come back on what, a point there. In terms of, I keep saying the same thing about considering the merits of each proposal. The fact that it's a retrospective application cannot be taken into account, as I know that members are aware. It needs to be still looked at as if it hadn't happened, even though in this instance, obviously, there is the background of that application and the specific requirements of the condition. I mentioned earlier about obviously the rationale that's been stated in this is in the report about the perspective of the developer about the unregistered land and not actually constituting highway verge to be able to then provide the footpath as per the condition. So that is their perspective on how things have come about. Again, in terms of the actual proposal in front of members, the question is whether or not actually there are grounds to refuse this application. And in that instance, we looked obviously to KCC Highways in this instance to give us their steer on pedestrian safety. Even if they're not adopting it, they are still a statutory highway authority, and we look to advise on that. They have obviously given their comment, which is in the report. They've suggested that there would need to be conditions to make it acceptable, and that is obviously what we have moved on. But so the judgment is about whether or not what's been done is safe, not whether or not what's been done is as ideal as the previous approval. Thank you.
Okay.
One point, because it is about whether or not it's safe. Now, I did hear, I think Annabelle might have said that actually it wasn't considered to be totally safe. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said there were cases where this wouldn't be safe for some people because of the undulations that are now in the footpath.
Well, it's the opinion that some users might find it slightly difficult if moving gates, but I don't think it's so much the undulation is that extreme that it would cause most people being able-bodied people to walk along it quite easily in the same way you might walk along a footpath. It's nowhere near as undulating or unlevel as many public footpaths going. It's a sort of nearly level but not completely level, and it does slightly turn, and we've seen in the photographs where it drops down slightly, but it's gradual level changes, it's not extreme. But it is considered safer than walking along the highway for most people would be able to use it.
I've got Councillor Wing next.
I'm still confused with the whole gate situation. Could you go back to the picture, the real picture of the lovely path? The other one that looks down it. So, and I've got lots of questions to ask. So if I'd actually like the bendy bit with the lamppost. So the first question I want to ask is, where is the unregistered land? Because I'd like to see which bit of land made them move. I'd also, could you go to the lamppost, close to the lamppost? Because I think obviously the lamppost is a problem. So if I'm coming off at the end of this, will I see a gate? And if I see a gate, surely I can just walk around it if there's a gate at one end and the other. So the function of the gate is absolutely useless if that footpath isn't enclosed by another fence. I'd also like to know, have we got a hump situation? So we've got a rise going up and a rise going down. I'd actually like to know the gradient of that rise up and rise down, and whether it's compliant with the Equalities Act and disability access. Because looking at the gradient there, I certainly know that my 86-year-old mother would not be able to go down that slope safely in her electric wheelchair. We've spoken about people going onto the road, but how do people in wheelchairs get onto the road when there is no dropped curb? So I cannot approve this, because I cannot sit here as an able-bodied person and approve something which is going to be unsafe for people with mobility issues. And we are in Minster, where there will be a significant number of older people with mobility issues. There's just, you know, this it's also unadopted, and we know as ward councillors, when you come to an alley which is unadopted, it's very difficult to get rubbish shifted from it, footpaths mended, holes in it mended, because nobody wants to stump up. So the other issue is, who does the land belong to that footpath is on top of, and are they aware of this? And the other issue is, do we want to set up a situation for our, I think it's our 1.5 enforcement officers, to have to keep an eye on a short piece of pathway that really should be compliant with modern standards of footpaths, and certainly compliant with KCC. So I can't support this either.
So to just come back on a couple of those points, because you asked some questions with regards to what's being proposed. So, I mean, just if looking at this image here, the unregistered land, from what we understand, effectively the edge of the highway that you can see where the current footpath on the right-hand side of the image is at the moment, and that was obviously to continue on along with the road, basically, so you're right on that line of road, you can see along with the mouse pointer there. So that is the unregistered bit of land. That grass bit that you can see there is effectively the unregistered land. So originally thought to be highway verge, which means that KCC effectively have control over it, and then you can do it in that way and actually go through the Highway Act to get the footpath in. But again, what's been put forward is that wasn't possible, given that it was unregistered. In terms of the point with regards to accessibility, obviously the provision of gates does make it more difficult for different people to access that footpath. In terms of your point about people being able to walk around it, I understand what you're saying there. Obviously, that's not to say that it's always going to be quite as clear in terms of that verge as it was in terms of the bits outside of that outside of that footpath. But that's true. There is a particular reason, obviously, why highways have asked for that gate, so that people are aware that they're going onto someone else's land that's not highways. In terms of gradients, we don't have that information. Obviously, this is one of those situations where it's there. So we're not really able to actually request plans to show the gradients. It's literally a judgment that can be made by, again, officers visiting the site, and in this instance, obviously, KCC Highways, again, looking at this site and seeing what's actually been done on site as well. I take your point with regards to whether or not you're restricting access with regards to, I suppose, less able people. I think that there is a proviso within the NPPF which talks about trying to provide safe and accessible pedestrian links. In this instance, there is clearly a balance to be struck between what developments this is serving, what it's connecting to, and in this instance, obviously, we've put forward a recommendation that we should approve it because it does provide a wider footpath, that does allow for the vast majority of access. As for specifically electronic wheelchairs, or I suppose scooters, or the buggies that you get as mobility aids, I'm afraid we're not qualified to say that that's definitively able to be used. I would say from walking that myself, there are bits where the gradient is more pronounced. You can actually see one in this photo here, but it's very challenging for me to state definitely. It's a gradient, but it's not a severe gradient, I would say, on that. The only way to judge it is to walk it, I'm afraid.
I have Councillor Keane, and then I do have Councillor Orban and Councillor Matterface.
Thank you. I mean, it's the gates. I know Kent Highways have said they were needed, but it's the gates that bother me in terms of access. And I can't see why I understand the need to make it clear that it's not owned by KCC. Could there not just be signs? I know that's not the proposal here, but for me, the gates are actually a hindrance, and I can't see they make anything safer.
Can I just confirm one thing? There are signs as well. Sorry, just to confirm. So it's both, but yes, I take it. Yeah, absolutely.
Councillor Alban.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's been quite interesting listening to members discussing this. I'm probably going to be against most of the people who've spoken tonight, in that you got a choice. You're a human being. You got a choice. You don't have to walk down there. You can walk in the road like they do now, and disabled buggies, whatever. I take it they go along the road, or disabled people will go along the road without using that. I'm just taking that as read. So either you have this or you don't, right? And then they're going to have to put something else in. But whether you can make them take it up or not is another matter. And I've just had a couple of questions first. It's been mentioned about the hedge taken out. Was this a protected hedge? Do we know? Question, please.
No, so when we originally had reports when this was removed, there's no suggestion that was done in contravention of any, it wasn't unlawful, the removal.
Okay, so that's not a problem. Might be a problem for people because the hedge was nice, etc., but legally it's not a problem. Two, another point, it's 1.2 metres and when it was going to be 0.9. What we're talking about, this much, I mean, that's just nonsense in relation to the width of the footpath. Personally speaking, again, I concur with colleagues who are saying about the gates are not particularly, I mean, they don't have to put them in, they can be on the plan, but they don't have to put them in unless a condition says that they have to. So that's up to them whether they put the gates in. Can I just check with the officers? Is the condition says these gates must be there?
Yeah, condition 2. Within 2 months, the gates and signage have to be installed.
Okay. So that's a condition. We've got to deal with this application, not the previous one. That's being taken care of. Enforcement are taking care of that, and they can continue with that. Personally, I can't see anything wrong with it. I can't see why you would refuse it. I really, really can't. So I won't be refusing this, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. I also wanted to ask, did the developers by any chance look at registering the unregistered land?
I can't speak to that. I don't know, I'm afraid.
They could have. Okay, do I have any other speakers? In that case, I'm actually going to ask another question. Councillor Wing.
KCC have managed to put a lamp post in that unregistered land. How did they do that?
I think actually, to be honest, it may be. This is without knowledge precisely, that actually that may actually delineate where the unregistered strip is between that post and the footpath. But I can't speak to it. I don't know. I haven't got the details of when KCC put it in, so I'm afraid we don't have that information.
And I've heard almost everyone that's spoken has talked about gates. Do we really have to have them? Because if I was walking down that footpath, I'd just walk round it.
So in this instance, we've applied to put the condition with requiring the gates on the basis of the Highways comments. So we've looked to provide what they have requested from their purposes to ensure that in their mind that the development is as safe as it could be, and that's why we think the gates should be included.
Councillor Wing.
I mean, my concern is still the gradient. Unless any of us have actually been in a wheelchair, and I haven't, but I have tried to manage my mother in a wheelchair, which isn't an easy feat on any of our footpaths, but this is a new footpath, so it should be the highest we could possibly do. If we were of a mind to disapprove this or not to support it, could they flatten it out? Because it seems to me this developer's got just the sort of machinery to level this out, to remove that gradient completely, to make it, to try and do all they can to get around a problem that they have. Then there would be, you know, it's still unadopted, which creates a real issue for me, because going forward I can see this just being a piece of footpath that is never looked after, if we're really being honest. But then most of our footpaths are not looked after anyway, so anyway, I just asked that.
As to, I think it's difficult to say what could be done, because obviously in terms of actually excavating out basically underneath where that path is at the moment, obviously there are level changes either side, how that can be constructed. Again, it comes back to that point of whether or not the proposal is acceptable or not. I think it's difficult to start talking about what then happens next in terms of how they deal with the refusal, if it was to be refused, and whether or not it's adapting what's there or moving forward with something else. I mean, clearly, one way or another, there needs to be a footpath link from one end to this housing development. So whatever happens, whether or not, you know, this is approved or something else comes forward, But yeah, again, it's difficult to say exactly the extent of work that would be needed. You can see there the level change that occurs and the amount of excavation that would be needed to get a level, entirely level all the way along, you know, from one end to the other.
Councillor Matterface.
This is a public footpath. This is not a pavement. So this is not the sort of pavement you would get round town. So do we assume there are slightly different requirements if something's classed as a public footpath as opposed to a pavement that we would consider? Because is that what, I mean, KCC didn't want to adopt it because various things, but if we class this as a public footpath, it doesn't have to meet the same criteria as a pavement like, say, out there.
So a path, as part of, I suppose, the Highway Act, if you're trying to adopt something under that, it does require to meet certain standards. And yeah, indeed, that if it's not been built for that purpose, it doesn't necessarily have to meet those standards. So in this instance, obviously, it's not being considered under those standards. There's no requirement for it to be adopted. And indeed, we have, you know, many housing developments where the roads aren't adopted, with varying degrees of success, it's fair to say. But no, in this instance, it doesn't necessarily have to meet a specific standard under the Highway Act.
Okay, if I don't have any more speakers, then we will now put the... Councillor Wynne.
So I'm really sorry. I mean, who'd have thought a little path would create this much interest? But was there a footpath there originally?
No.
Okay, and again, I'm now going to put the motion for the officer's recommendation for approval to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? And abstentions?
It's a heat between favour and against, 6-6.
Okay.
You have the entire vote.
Chair's casting vote, I've voted against. Which means we have to write another motion.
Can I come back to?
Don't applause yet. It's not guaranteed.
So
we have to write another motion.
So the options for members are, I think it's pretty clear. It's visit the site, and then come back next month to have a further discussion about it following that site visit. Or if members do consider that the footpath, as they've seen, is considered to be unsafe by virtue of changes in levels or provision of gates, then that would be a motion that would have to be put forward. I would recommend that before doing that action, that members visit the site, but that's my perspective. Obviously, members can put whatever motion they wish for it.
I think I'm not going to take questions from the floor. I'm going to invite those who want to be a part of preparing the next motion to come forward just to discuss briefly.
I think they just want
A vote for a site visit then, okay,
Well,
or fair enough.
Proposer in a second.
Yeah, in that case, who's going to propose a site visit?
I'll propose a site visit, Chair.
And
Thank
second, Councillor Matterface. In that case, all in favour of a site visit? I think that's carried. We've got... were there any votes against? And any abstentions on that? Okay, so that carried. Thank you. We've got a site visit. Okay, so the next agenda item is item A04, the former Port Control East Pier Ramsgate. Speaking in favour of the application is Ms Teresa Smith. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Well, my plan was to hold up the pictures of the existing, of the original artwork, but that's part of the application. Thank you for having me over, and also thank you for the original approval for the same artwork a couple of years ago. Just to explain why we're back where we are now. The site underneath the brasserie has deteriorated further. It was already going to be a fairly problematic site to work with and to install the artwork. But my conversations with the harbour master have revealed that it's actually a quite poor state now. So that was why the proposal to put the artwork back in its original location in Berth 1 was put forward. It was outside of the red line of the original application, which was approved, so that's why we're here today. So one of the reasons for the redirection, as well as the condition of the original site, was also it's a site that we've already worked with. We understand the logistics, and it's significantly cheaper to put it into the original location than to deal with the treacherous site underneath the brasserie. So there are practical reasons why it actually is quite a prudent decision to move it back to Berth 1. Also, I was going to show you a material sample of copper. The new material will be copper-faced letters, and that is because it's a very traditional marine material and will age very beautifully. And the material sample I had turned a very lovely copper verdigris colour, and that will be the copper, the colour of the letters in the new version of the artwork. So that was really all I wanted to say. Just there are a lot of very practical considerations as to why the new site is actually preferable. The logistics are known, the expense is considerably less, and actually it can be seen better from both East and West Cliffs in Ramsgate. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have, speaking against, Councillor Davis. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, let me explain. I'm not against the principle of art or indeed the recognition of Perfugium miseris, which is, let's remember, been above the door of the lighthouse for the last 100 years. So this simply repeats what we've already got on the end of the West Pier. However, my concerns are more about the practical, for this section, although we will come to the listing aspects in a moment or in the next item. However, under 4D, we're talking about practical planning considerations. This council has set aside $282,500 for East Pier building structural improvements. We have set aside $70,000 to replace the ladders on this section of the pier and the protective buffers either side of them. The rationale behind that is to enable larger vessels to dock on this section of the pier. On that basis, Why are we and we have to spend that, by the way. I'd like to highlight the fact that whilst this has been installed, or another version of this, because it's not the same size as the previous version that was installed, these letters are smaller than the ones that were there before. This is a listed, but I'll come back to the listed asset on the appropriate 4E. However, we have set aside money to use this pier as a working harbour for the purposes it's intended for. It's not a playground, it's not a canvas, it's a working harbour, and we've got enough issues with other areas of it that are not being allowed to function in their intended form. The harbour listing, incidentally, I'd like to remind members, has been upgraded since this was installed before, or another version of the same thing. The harbour has been upgraded from from grade 2 to grade 2 star listing, which is quite an important improvement or enhancement to the protection, and it means that unless good public gain can be showed, there should be no damage or anything to this to the material of the fabric of the harbour. I'd like to draw the committee's attention to the fact that both the conservation officer and others have said, and the report officer, they consider there to be a level of harm caused to the setting and appearance. That's the context of it. There is damage. This needs fixing into the material of the sandstone that the pier is built from, which is having its own problems with weathering anyway. I don't think we should be putting anything unnecessary and affixing it to the fabric of the Royal Harbour. And there are many that think this. The rationale behind allowing it would be for social and economic benefits. I'd like to know what they are. Artwork is great. There are other locations around the harbour that are quite tatty that these same letters could be installed on and could still be visible, enjoyed by the public and achieve the outcome. But I will just finish, this is not the right location for this. It can't use the existing fixings because the letters that are being proposed are smaller than the ones that were fitted there before. It will interfere with the use of the pier for the purposes it's intended for. And I'd like to point out that it will need an MMO licence because it's below the median high water line. So there's a lot of questions before I think this should be in any way considered, let alone approved. And there are better options. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now ask the Principal Planning Officer, Annabelle, to outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this application does seek permission for the erection of artwork signage on the East Pier Ramsgate. So this is the East Pier here. And this is the application site outlined in red. And the site is in the Ramsgate Conservation Area and as has been mentioned, it is a listed structure. So just some photographs of the East Pier and one further zoomed out. So this is a detailed view of the proposed signage artwork that is being proposed here. As has been mentioned, they will be copper face letters and they will be 1.2 metres in height. And the actual meaning, if you translate it in from Latin, I'm not going to try and pronounce it, is actually refuge for those in need. And the letters would, as has been mentioned as well, be located below high tide level, so they would not be visible at high tide level, and there would be a need for a licence, but that would be a separate piece of legislation for the applicants to seek if consent is granted. It is considered the proposed development would not have any adverse impact on residential amenity, highway safety or flood risk, but there would be, it is acknowledged, some harm from the physical attachment of the sign to the listed pier and the alterations to its appearance, but it is considered that these are limited and reversible, and the harm would be balanced against the social and economic benefits of the development, and these include tourism, they include just the interest of the artwork itself, and it's the actual historic regard to the maritime history of Ramsgate, and it is considered that harm is not significant and is outweighed by those other benefits of this proposal. So it is recommended for approval.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. And I've got Councillor Alban first to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think what's interesting with this is that when the previous artwork was there, it was very much welcomed by a lot of the town and visitors. And the important part for me is seeing that the harbour master states that the works have previously been done and there were no issues regarding it then, so from our side there are no comments. So the harbour master has no issues with this whatsoever. And he's the guy that I would take notice of. So all in all, Chair, I think this is most welcome. And I fully support it, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Useki.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I have to disagree with my colleague there because this is a listed, grade 2 star listed building that we're going to start bashing about to put up a sign which could go elsewhere. I don't see the main advantage of putting it where they're proposing to put it, especially as half the time it's going to be underwater. So what's the point? What's the point of putting it there then? No, I'm sorry, I disagree with you. There's no point in having it there. No one's going to come and look at it if it's underwater unless you're gun diving. I'm afraid it's a grade 2 star listed building. We shouldn't be bashing it about. We should be looking and protecting this building. And if you want to put a sign up, put it up somewhere else. Thank you.
Councillor Livingston. Councillor Livingston, just you don't ever want that, do you? Mr. Livingston's just going to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify one point that Councillor Rozecki said there. So this application is full planning consent. So it's looking at the setting of the listed building, the conservation area and the impact on the conservation area. The next application, which is going to be spoken about, is the listed building consent. So it's the impact on the significance of the listed Royal Harbour. So that is the application where the direct impact of actually physically attaching this to the listed structure should be considered. It doesn't mean that the setting of listed structures, of which the whole harbour is listed, can't be considered when looking at this application, but just to be specific about which application is considering which part.
Councillor Rattigan.
I have to say that, with the minimal of impact it's going to have on the harbour, I think it looks quite nice, and it's something different and brings tourism. So I can't see any harm. So I'd be supporting it.
Councillor Wing.
It's obviously in my harbour, in my ward. The harbour's in my ward. Sorry, it's going to be a long night, but. I fully support this. I know there are issues with the listed status. If the harbour master's got no complaints, then I've got no complaints. But I want to remind people what the last installation was like, and I was really unlucky because I didn't manage to get one of the letters when it was up for auction. And the whole idea is that it's revealed as the tide goes up and down. So there's a real interface with the tide that sometimes you don't notice, but you do notice in the harbour there. And I think it's another thing that will link another group of people to the harbour, which quite clearly is something that I think we're all rightly proud of and all love. So I fully support this, and the message is a good message as well.
Councillor Moore.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As this is on the waterline and that particular stretch of the harbour is for larger shipping, how will that signage be affected when larger shipping are in there, when the ladderways are repaired and larger ships are moored there? Is it what protects it?
Yeah, it will be protected by defenders, and we are obviously got the Harbour Master's opinion that there would not be an impact, and he raises no objection, so we're assuming that he is considering the harbour for larger vehicle ships and as well as at the current time.
Councillor Wing.
The last letters were bigger, they were much bigger, and it was a route that I often walk and look at, obviously, because I live nearby, but the larger ships were able to dock or moor or berth or whatever they do against the other letters. So clearly there is a way, a maritime way of the ships not being damaged and also these not being damaged.
And if this one is approved, to what extent is it dependent on the next application immediately after this?
You need both consents to be able to do it, is the easiest way to put that.
Anyone else? In that case, can I put this one to the vote? No, sorry. I move that the officers recommend... No, hang on a minute, where have I got to? We're going to go to the vote. I was right first time, wasn't it? Sorry, it's going to be a long night. We'll now put the motion for the officer's recommendation for approval to the vote. Those in favour? Any against? And abstentions? And mine was in favour.
Okay, 13, carried.
So that's carried. So we're going to move on next to item 4E. Speaking against this is Councillor Davis again. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I think some of the points that need to be made here have been made, and Councillor Rizeki has raised them. I'd like to remind or recommend that everybody in this room actually has a look at what Grade 2 star listing means and when it's justifiable to cause any impact on a Grade 2 star listed asset. There must be a clearly defined public gain and benefit in order for that to take place. There is no yield or gain with this other than, yes, people like to look at it, but they can look at it perhaps at the other end of the pier, a fixed, but, you know, we've got ugly fencing around the slipways, which has had various proposals to put it on there, stick it on there. It's still relevant. It still looks across the harbour. We do not need to drill into sandstone, some of which has got quite serious condition problems. We've got damage to that pier caused by, apparently, by the barge that was moored there. The sandstone is of an age, it is not weathering well. Also, despite the fact that there's no, the Harbour Master, by the way, has made no comment. He hasn't said, I don't object. He said, no comment. Now, the depth of these letters, it seems, comes out 0.17 metres beyond the buffers either side of the ladders that I've mentioned, for which a budget of 70,000 has just been approved in order to moor ships there. Now, if ships are moored there, and we're hoping to have a tall ships event in a couple of years' time, so it'll look amazing. What's the point in having it there if it's got ships moored in front of it, because no one's going to see it? Plus, the whole issue with the listed harbour is the fact that the listing was increased, it spread around the entire harbour estate, and that was done for a reason, to protect it from further damage. This is not a playground, it's a working harbour. And the rationale behind this council's decision to spend 70,000 on the access ladders and the buffers either side of them is firstly because of the listed responsibility, but also, as it clearly states in that item, to moor larger vessels than we can accommodate at the moment. So I see no point in approving in allowing drilling into a listed asset causing potential damage. If it were to even be using the previous fixings, that might be a different thing, but these are 1.2 metres, not 1.8 metres high. I'd also like to point out, incidentally, that verdigris from the distance across the harbour where you'll see it against the sandstone background won't even show once it deteriorates. So, you know, however, we're talking about the listing and the curtilage. That view across the harbour should be as it was designed to be, as Smeaton and his predecessors did, not our version of it. Thank you.
Thank you. I now pass to the Principal Planning Officer, Annabelle, to outline the report.
Right, thank you, Chair. I will skim through a couple of these slides because we've just looked at very similar ones. But so if we're looking at the sign, it is correct that it would measure, the sign and its frame would measure some 1.5 metres high, 22 metres wide, and it would project, as has been mentioned, 0.17 metres beyond the fenders on the face of the pier. And it would be connected to the 4 timber fenders, one at each end and 2 close to the centre, so as you can sort of see in this picture here. And they're with 4 bolts in each fender, and we would be bolted directly to the face of the pier at 4 points between the timber fenders. So the physical attachment of the sign to the pier would result in some damage to the historic fabric and the pier. And the Conservation Officer has commented on this point, and she states that she does consider there would be a level of harm caused to the setting and appearance of the listed asset and the Royal Harbour. But however, all mitigations have been made in the approach to the attachment of the pier, and that the physical harm is reduced where it can be. She also goes on to say there are other public and social benefits to consider, as well as the potential that the sign could be removed and the pier made good. So, sorry. So it's officers do not consider the impact of the the harm to the listed structure to be significant or prejudice the future of the listed structure continuing. And it is, whilst this is an application for permission, there is an indication that the sign could be removed once it had served its purpose, if that was the case, and the structure made good has been mentioned. And signage with the same wording has previously been installed in a similar location on the pier, and albeit that the grading of the harbour has been elevated after that time, but it did create a lot of public interest, social interaction and economic benefits, potentially from increased tourism to the harbour and Ramsgate in general. So it is considered that there are public benefits that do outweigh the limited harm to the listed structure, and the application is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. And I have Councillor Moore and then Councillor Alban next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. When this sign is eventually installed, is there a condition that there's like a liability or indemnity that should any adverse damage be done to the harbour, that's covered, or is that not part of it?
Thank you, Chair. It wouldn't be something that would be part of any listed building consent. So it's separately in terms of any permission to do anything to, in this instance, a council structure. Then that's anything to do with damage is not covered by planning law. It'd be covered by civil law in the sense of that would be how any damage would be dealt with. Councillor Alban.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to go back on part of what Councillor Davis said, my understanding of the Harbour Master's no comment is that he's got no comment because he sees no harm, and that's why he's got no comment. He doesn't. So ditto to the last one. I fully support it, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Ozeki.
Thank you, Chair. I go back to my last comments, really. It's a grade 2 star listed structure, and we have to protect that. That's what we're here for. You wouldn't like it if we went around sticking aluminium windows into Grade 2 listed buildings, never mind Grade 2 star listed. And what we're doing here is sticking something on a Grade 2 star listed structure, which it will damage, even though making it good with polyfiller afterwards is not going to actually do any good to it. It's a solid sandstone, it needs protecting, and we're here to protect it.
Councillor Wing.
I don't think it's going to be polyfiller that will be used, but never mind. And I don't think the timber fenders are Smeaton's originals. And having lived in and had the responsibility of protecting a Grade 2 listed building, I believe it's more about, is there material change to a listed structure, and there clearly is no removal of any important features here. There's just something that is being added that can be totally reversed. If it's being fixed to the timber fenders, then it might not be fixed into the sandstone. So I fully support this, because I think the gain in terms of tourist and interest in the port it outweighs the small potential damage to the listed structure.
And can I ask about, sorry, I'm on a roll tonight. Can I ask about the repairs to the wall and the impact also regarding, okay, let's go start that sentence again. Councillor Davis has said about the damage to the sandstone that's already there. How does that compare now, the condition now, compared to when this signage was there previously? Have we seen any deterioration, and has that been assessed? And how would repairs be carried out?
So we don't have any information with regards to or any concerns that have been raised about the condition of where this sign is to be installed. There is a separate application which will be coming before members for the area around the Harbour Brasserie, which is a specific concern in terms of the condition at that point in the harbour, but it's not with regards to this particular, this stretch specifically. In terms of actually the work that's to be done, as you can see on the image here, it's the 4 holes that are being put, the resin bolts that are being put into the actual wall itself, whereas all of the other attachments are on the timber wall beams. So it's a limited incursion. As for how they would be repaired, it would be a matter for in this instance, the harbour master, in terms of requiring when it's actually removed that it's made good. That is something that in itself wouldn't need listed building consent to repair or fill in any holes, but it would obviously be under advisement of the actual owner of the land, which in this instance is TDC.
Do I have any other questions or comments? In that case, we will now put the motion for the officer's recommendation for approval to vote. Those in favour? And those against? It's carried. Thank you. Right, moving on to item 4I, item R09 103, 223 to 227 North Down Road, Margate. Firstly, we're just going to, I'm very aware actually we've got quite a few items left on the agenda. We're just going to take a 5-minute break, 8:45. We're going to be going on late tonight, so before we start on the public speaking on the next one, we'll just take a 5-minute break. Thank you. All right, if everyone could move back to their seats, please. Thank you. All right, thank you and welcome back. So item R09, 223 to 227 North Down Road. Firstly, for public speaking, I have Councillor Curry under Rule 20.1. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members and officers. I'm here today to support the retrospective planning application for the International Food Centre in Cliftonville. For those of you who are not familiar with the shop, the business has completely transformed a rundown part of North Down Road and brought long-term empty units back into use. Unfortunately, the planning for the building work was undertaken during the COVID pandemic, and after speaking with the owner, it became clear to me that during the second COVID lockdown, there was certainly miscommunication between the owner and his agent regarding what had been submitted and agreed in the original application. I don't believe there was any malicious intent by the owner during the application process, and if it wasn't for the COVID lockdowns and the lack of in-person meetings during that time, I don't think we would be here today. The current shopfront design was actually based on other nearby businesses. The shopfront is impressive and fits the need of a large modern business, which must be safe and secure when both open and closed, and offer good mobility access to all. There are 40 or so other aluminium-style shopfronts on North Down Road. However, few are as well designed as the one now being discussed. A petition I saw online by Change UK, raised by a customer regarding this application, gained over 1,000 signatures in support from local residents. Planning officers, however, do have a difficult job complying with conservation area regulations that just don't meet the needs of many modern businesses. Criminal damage suffered by shops with the old timber design has forced some to close down due to high maintenance and rising insurance costs, mainly due to large windows and front doors that have been frequently vandalised. After reading the Conservation Officer's report, I checked the North Down Road Conservation Area Character Appraisal and Management Plan, which can be found on the TDC website. In Appendix 2, it lists all the historic shopfronts in North Down Road, and number 223 to 227 is not among them. The last thing we all want to see is a new business which offers so much to the local community, incurring tens of thousands of debt replacing a state-of-the-art shopfront with a timber design which is just not practical for this type of business. I urge members to please approve this retrospective application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I will now pass to the Planning Applications Manager to outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. So the application site is in the centre of the photo. This is an application, as mentioned, for a retrospective application for the installation of a shopfront. The main consideration is the impact on the conservation area. So this is the site outlined in red. So, as mentioned by Councillor Curry, the site is within the North Down Road conservation area. The conservation areas in and around Cliftonville were designated in 2016, and as mentioned, there is a conservation area appraisal. It doesn't identify this, the previous shopfront here, as a historic shopfront. The appraisal, however, also talks about North Down Road in its entirety, and identifies that one of the main issues with North Down Road and one of the risks to the conservation area is the erosion of traditional materials, also the insertion of modern materials, and quantifies that as a negative feature of the conservation area. So what we'll do is have a little look at what previously was in situ and what is now in situ on the site at the moment. So this is an image from 2012, so it previously shows it when it was a vacant unit. What you can also see where the mopeds are at the end, you have a slightly differently designed shopfront. It's a bit small, I apologise for that. but it's also very similar to the timber shop front in terms of a very small stall riser and large glazed openings with the fan lights above. But you can see how the previous shop front was. You've also got, you can see here, you have aluminium doors which were present, and similarly there's an aluminium door here, and similarly then in the shop front further along you've got an aluminium door set within that, that sort of timber work around it. Then this is 2018, so obviously the shop front is still there, but obviously it's no longer got the glazing, it's got the advertisements that have been put up, the images that have been put up there. You can see obviously then the signage, and you can see it's a different business at that point to the right hand side within that part of this building. And then we have a few photos of the existing shopfront as constructed. So, as mentioned, the shopfront has been replaced with an aluminium shopfront. You have this side at the moment has obviously got the shutters down in this image, and you've got the shutter box which you can see running along just underneath the fascia sign. See, there's a new entrance that's at the on the corner, which is now recessed, whereas the entrance was round the side, and we can look at the elevations to see that. So looking round then, just to show you just a view as you go down North Down Road. And then we've got a closer in view, so you can see it's now consistent all the way across, and there's another image later on which shows this. So there is more consistency that's been offered by the shop front as it goes down and takes in the other shop fronts that are there. There you go, it's a bit more of a detailed view. And then this is the view from Google. So there is history to this site. It's been an ongoing planning enforcement matter for a while. Following the identification of the breach, we advised that it was unlikely that the aluminium shopfront would gain consent in officers' view in relation to the loss of the timber shopfront, and then we approved a replacement of the timber shopfront to go back. However, we did receive a subsequent application for the retrospective retention of the shopfront as constructed, and that was refused by officers on behalf of the council. This is the application that's now been resubmitted, and obviously has been called to committee for members to make a judgment on. In terms of the officer view, that hasn't changed following the subsequent refusal. We do have a loss of traditional materials in this area. The previous shopfront was from, I think it's between 1907 and 1940, so it's not historic in the sense of it's early 20th century, but it does contribute to it did contribute to the conservation area, in so much as the building itself was included in the conservation area. It's obviously down at the eastern end of it, but it was included, whereas other parts have been excluded from the conservation area. The shutter box and style of the aluminium shutters is of concern to officers. In conservation areas, we would normally look for larger openings in shutters. So if members can think of this sort of standard brick pattern, you can have the outlines of brick shutters, which it does apply and has been used in conservation areas around the district. Obviously, that is part of this shop front, and there is concern about the obtrusive nature of those shutters, notwithstanding the fact that there is obviously going to be a functional need for shutters for this type of business, and that is understood, but the style of them is considered to be obtrusive. It comes back to that question that we've just been talking about, which is we consider that there is harm to the conservation area by virtue of the change that's been made to the shop front, and we don't think that the public benefits outweigh that harm in this instance, with an objection from the conservation officer. So in this instance, we are recommending refusal of the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. And anyone want to speak? So Councillor Alban first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Could I just ask, is the signage around the top of the shutter boxes are illuminated? Have they got consent as well, or have they not got consent?
There's external illumination, but there's no planning permission, but I don't think they need planning permission under the advert regs because of the fact that the letters are less than, sorry, this is so less than 75 centimetres in length.
Okay. I'm a bit torn with this, to be quite honest. It does look better than the previous. However, I think if we was to overturn the recommendation for approval, then it's a possibility that others along North Down Road may wish to copy. I'm not saying they would or they wouldn't, but it's a possibility. So I'm just going to hold fire on my thoughts with that anyway. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Matterface.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the planning history, there's appeal lodged following refusal to replace the windows. Replacement windows from timber to composite sash, double glazed windows and white. Are those have those windows actually been put in?
No, that's I need to check. I think it relates to the upper floors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's difficult to tell whether they're actually timber or. But as far as you're aware, they are still the windows as was.
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just it's a proposal. I can't say for certain, but it's a separate application, so separate consideration.
And March the 1st of this year, installation replacement shop front was refused. So because that was refused, presumably this is what we're looking at now because he went ahead and put it in. Is that correct?
No, it was in situ when that was refused.
All right. So thank you. If they were in situ when that was refused, obviously I wasn't involved then. What has happened since then and now? He's put in the retrospective, the fact that the job had been done. Is that?
It's the same application has been submitted again. Yeah, there's additional information that's been submitted to justify the proposal, and I think that's where the difference comes now. Just for members' reference, because this is something that does come up occasionally. Technically, you can submit a planning application for the same thing twice. It's if they submitted it a third time and it was refused, it had already been refused to, we can refuse to determine it, but we still obviously need to consider the application.
Councillor Keane.
Thank you. I mean, I know North Down Road very well, and anyone that's been along there knows there's a huge variety of different buildings. Now, there are some beautiful shop fronts there that we definitely need to preserve, but the building that we're looking at was never one of them, and what they've done, I think, is a huge improvement to what was there before, and it's been a real benefit to the area in the terms of increasing footfall, especially at that end of North Down Road. Now, there are some sort of crime problems in that particular area, so sort of the shutters were needed. I appreciate there could have been different types of shutters, but I think that's why, you know, for that level of glass frontage, you absolutely need that security for that building. Otherwise, you'd get broken windows all stuck up like, you know, plenty of other shops along North Down Road have got that become an eyesore. So I think this is a great improvement, and I would be approving what has happened.
I have Councillor Rattigan next, please.
I completely agree with Councillor Keane. You know, having lived in Clifton Wall my life, and actually have two properties along there myself. Over the last 5 years, I've replaced 4 windows where they've been, you know, and we're there's nothing in there. We're nurseries. So there's nothing for people to steal. There is a whole mix of shops along there. If you go, some really nice ones, some really ugly ones, but I mean the officer's statement that this was detriment to the area. I mean it's brought a really run-down part of town into a real vibrant area, and even with the signage, it's very sort of old school signage. They haven't gone for illuminated signage, so I will definitely be supporting this application.
Councillor Alban next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, I think what Mr Livingston has just said, that this is the second time this same application has been submitted and it was refused the first time. So I cannot see how the planning committee can now overturn that and approve it. We've already said it's to be refused. It's already been refused. So why would this committee now approve it? Thank you.
You want to come back, Councillor Keane?
Yes, please, just to answer Councillor Auburn's thing. It was refused before by the officers. It's not been to planning committee before. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Councillor Wing.
We had a similar situation with the accountants across the road, and I had to declare an interest because they're my accountants and I did sign their petition. So I wasn't involved in that debate, but I think that was overturned as well. I also know North Down Road very well, and I find it quite strange because we've got Costa Coffee further down the road, which is a similar sized building with stuff which doesn't fit the heritage. In fact, it's probably worse than this. I do think the shutters are really clumsy, and I wish during the daytime they'd have them up because that would improve the look during the day. So I do have a bit of a concern about the shutters. I'm sure there were other designs that would have been less clumsy that maybe could have been built into the building. The top part of the building, they're keeping the heritage there. I mean, even if they're not wood, we can't see they're not wood. So I definitely think we've got to somehow start moving forward with some non-wood materials that are sympathetic to conservation zones. Quite a lot of Europe already do quite a lot of this in their historic areas, and you wouldn't notice unless you were an expert. So I'm of a mind to support to refuse the officer's decision. This is where it gets confusing, because I do think it's tidied up the area, and I do remember this area was really bad.
Councillor Matterface.
So it was refused by officers, it's come to the committee. Has anything major changed in the actual application, anything that's in the documentation from then to now?
The fundamentals, I mean, it's the same proposal. So there was an additional statement that was provided which identified the application that Councillor Wing referenced, which was another case where it was refused and then they resubmitted and members turned it around and approved it. Just to come back on that point, I think whilst obviously the application is in front of members and it's for you to determine, it is an important point, the fact that it was refused by the council, and I just want to make that quite clear that you obviously delegate your authority to a lot of decisions to officers, but that doesn't necessarily mean, given that we've heard some of the justification that's been provided by Councillor Curry about the background behind it, it still needs to be considered again on its own merits tonight. But just as a point normally of order, if it was identical and no statement had come in, I would be pushing you to say you need to refuse this automatically, because there is no differentiation between officers and members in terms of where the decision comes from. It's the council. Thank you.
Councillor Garner.
Yeah, sorry to drag this out, but I just wanted to clarify one thing, or a couple of things. In the planning history, in 2021, there was a retrospective application for the proposed removal of the existing shop front and reinstatement of the traditional timber shop front, which planning officers granted, with an expectation that the applicant would reinstate with a timber shop front. The applicant, in fact, didn't reinstate with the timber shop front, but it implemented what we can see there, and has now come back with retrospective again to get that approved. Am I just getting that? Because I read in the conservation officer's report that she was a bit disappointed about that.
So, sorry, Chair, I'll just come back on that. So the application came in, that application that said we're going to put back the timber shop front came in after the enforcement inquiry because they had put this shop front in. Then it subsequently led to the application after that was approved, Obviously, the application then came in to seek retrospective consent for what's there. Obviously, there are a number of reasons why anyone could put that forward, and that again, just like the footpath, still needs to be considered on its merits. Thank you.
Okay, if I have no more questions or contributions, we will now put the motion for the officer's recommendation for refusal to the vote. Those in favour of refusal? And those against? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. So that is lost. So I'll go back to Mr Livingston.
So we'd invite members to propose a motion to approve, as you were obviously voted down the recommendation to refuse. Members have mentioned what the reasons would be, and so just to capture some of those, in terms of the benefits of the proposal, I've heard members mention about the increased security, and also, members have sort of mentioned it in terms of the sort of tidying up of that area. I would say that probably the way to put that would be the consistent design, because obviously it's more than just that corner which has been changed, it's the rest of it. So in terms of if members were to put forward a motion to approve, it's just to cite that the reasons would be that the increased security and consistent design outweigh the harm to the conservation area. Thank you.
I've got Councillor Keane proposing and Councillor Rattigan seconding. Everyone in favour of that, please? And any against? And any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda, D10. The land between 47 and 49 Rose Gardens, Minster. Public speaking, first in favour, I have Ms Lee James. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening and thank you for letting me speak. Firstly, apologies as I know nothing about policies and I'm not going to pretend to. I bought the land at Rose Gardens back in March this year. When I bought it, it was an overgrown, derelict piece of land that over many years has become a dumping ground. A neighbour told me that prior to me purchasing the land, it was apparently used as an allotment, but they had lived there for 15 years and it's been derelict throughout that time. I bought it as I want to provide adequate housing needs for myself, my daughter, my little grandson. My daughter went to primary school in St Nicholas and we loved the school and village ethos, so we are hoping that my grandson could attend Minster Primary in the future, which I know is an underdescribed fantastic school. Rose Gardens is a mixture of semi-detached bungalows, some with loft conversions, and semi-detached houses. I believe that the majority are owned by Orbit Housing. My immediate neighbour is doing a major extension that was recently passed by Thanet Council, which has already commenced. He has written a letter of support for my planning proposal. He also informed me prior to my purchase there was a lot of antisocial behaviour on it and vermin being present due to the rubbish contaminants being left on the land in the past. I understand a change could be unsettling, but I do feel that there has been some untrue speculations within the objections. From the original plan submitted, the planners wanted some amendments, which myself and my architect have worked closely with the planners and agreed a solution and changed the plans accordingly. Unfortunately, when the letters for the revised plans went out to the local residents stating there had been changes made, a few residents contacted me directly that were all in favour for the initial planning phase, as they believe the planning has now been changed to build 2 houses, thus why they objected. As I've got relationships with the neighbours, I asked them if they had looked at the revised plans online and they said no. So I advised them to do so and explain that this is not the case and talk them through the plans. However, they had already objected prior to this conversation. One of the objections said she wouldn't be able to access her car. I have been advised that she doesn't actually even live in Rose Gardens and resides in Brockman's Close, which isn't connected and or accessed via Rose Gardens. Before the revised plans went in, I invited all the residents to meet me at the land so I could go through the drawings and specifications with them, as I know a lot of them are elderly and have lived there for many years, so that if they had any concerns at that time, I could discuss with them to see if they had any issues of concerns. I also told them this is family homes, but a couple of the objections are because they think it's for profit. I've been very diligent over making sure we are not overlooked and ensuring off-street parking for these properties. Minster Parish Council agreed that this land was an eyesore and welcomed the development. So soon as I brought it, I had it cleared, which was a mammoth job, bigger than I thought, and I needed 25 grab lorries at a massive cost. Whilst clearing the land, our digger was also vandalised, having a brick thrown through the window. Since the early site works commenced with the clearance of rubbish, debris, etc., I fenced the land off to make it secure and stop trespassers. A final sentence from me is that one of the comments I would like to address is the suggestion of increase of antisocial behaviour. I do not understand how having 2 family homes on this site could cause an increase in antisocial behaviour. If this development isn't approved, then the land could end up going back to being derelict and all that comes with that. I have already provided the legal agreement for the SAM contributions. I thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Speaking under Council Rule 20.1, Councillor Smith, you have 3 minutes.
Marvellous. Thank you, Chair. So this plan, I've been approached by a very concerned neighbour, and this plan involves the imposition on a tiny cul-de-sac community of the imposition of 2 much larger dwellings than surround it. It is incongruous and out of keeping with the character and appearance of this small cul-de-sac. Neighbours feel strongly that they will be overlooked and that the development represents a drastic change to the neighbourhood that will impact significantly on their sense of quiet and privacy. And those are words which are repeated across a number of objections. Most of the surrounding properties are single-storey bungalows, many of which house elderly and vulnerable residents who are reluctant to object following reports of a very aggressive response to the first objection to appear on the planning portal. Parking arrangements are also deemed inadequate and potentially dangerous. Neighbours regularly use the small public alleyway that runs alongside and on which the proposed parking would impinge. This introduces an issue of public safety, potentially adding physical injury to the insult of this oversized development. Based on the submitted plans, neighbours assert that first floor windows on the east elevation will directly overlook numbers 41, 43, 45 and 47 and arguably impact on privacy for numbers 5, 7, 9 and 11 Rose Gardens. From the south elevation, numbers 36, 38, 49 and 51 will be overlooked. First floor windows on the north elevation will do likewise to numbers 1 and 3 Brockman's Close, and on the west elevation the windows will overlook numbers 19, 21, 23, 25, 27, 29 and 31 Freeman's Road. Neighbours appreciate that restriction of permission for these larger dwellings will limit the value that the applicant can expect to realise, but this is appropriate given the choice of site. The plot is eminently suitable for construction of one dwelling of a single storey, which will complement the existing neighbourhood and its vulnerable residents. Thank you.
Thank you. The Planning Applications Manager will now outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is for the erection of a pair of semi-detached 2-storey, 2-bed dwellings. Main considerations are impact on character and appearance of the area, living conditions of neighbours, highway safety. In terms of the principle of development, the site lies within the village confines, so it is acceptable in principle to develop this for housing, subject to all the normal other considerations. So this is a satellite image of Rose Gardens coming off Tothill Street. So the land that we are looking at is at the end of the cul-de-sac. So you can see the southern half of the cul-de-sac end has some garages and hard surface and parking, but the other end has this bit of land here, which you can see obviously in this image was sort of covered by scrub growth, and we'll look at some of the photos. Just to give you some context, to the north you have another area of hard standing with garages, and then you can see that there are neighbours further north, and then you've got neighbours to the west, and then obviously the neighbours that are directly adjacent on Rose Gardens. So this is the site in question. So again, just to the north of that is hard surfacing and the garages. It's using existing vehicular access at the end of Rose Gardens, an existing drop curb. So this is the entrance to the site, so you can see the drop curb that's there. The neighbouring property that's been mentioned on the left of this image that has consent for a rear extension, you can see there, which is number 49. The pathway that's been mentioned is the pathway that's just outside this fenced area here, and on the right hand side you've got number 47. So yeah, looking at the semis at the end of the cul-de-sac, you've got those two properties. Then looking back the other way, you can see behind those two trees, you've got another bungalow there, which is number 47. So going into the site, this is the footpath itself that's been mentioned. So just to confirm one thing, straight off the bat, there is a proposal for a fence to be erected next to that footpath, but there is no impingement on that footpath. The fence is outside, it's within the site and not on that footpath, so that footpath will be maintained. This is a view looking back along that footpath where the fence would run, so you can see the extent of the site, and it's already been mentioned that it has been fenced. So this is turning to the right from that, so you can see the extent of the site. You can see the hard surfacing on the right-hand side of the image that I mentioned to the north of the site, covering some of the land that's associated with some garages. And then looking back from that site, which is the neighbouring site, towards where that entrance is, you can see the area that's been fenced. And then this is just showing that hard surfaced area to the north. And then this is standing on the footpath, again looking across, so you can see those garages that I mentioned there and the site on the left-hand side. So this is an image, this is actually from 2009, it's taken from Google, just to give a bit of an elevated position to show you've got bungalows at the end of Rose Gardens, but then on the northern side of Rose Gardens you have two-storey properties that run alongside and opposite the bungalows, and then there's some two-storey properties that you can see at the end there when you're getting closer to Tothill Street. So as mentioned, this is the site extent. So what's proposed, as already mentioned, is some semi-detached properties. There have been amendments that were received as part of, during the course of the application. Specifically, the amendments were, I suppose, mainly trying to cover a highways comment that had come in that you'll see in the report, which raised concerns that the proposal hadn't demonstrated that vehicles can successfully manoeuvre to turn around on the site safely, which has been provided and agreed by highways as acceptable in terms of the tracking of vehicles. Also, a parking space has actually been removed from the proposal that was off street. So there previously were 4, and now there are 3, and again that's to increase the manoeuvrability. So there is a space per dwelling and I suppose an unallocated visitor space as well. That provision is considered definitely to be acceptable in accordance with highways guidance for 2-bed dwellings, and on that ground it's not considered that there is harm to substantial harm to highway safety from lack of parking from this proposal. It's accommodated within the site. So you can see from this image that there is gardens provided for the dwellings and off-street parking. One of the issues that's been raised and is dealt with in the report was concerns about because of the width of the access, what happens with the fire appliance. So that's been looked at specifically in terms of the distance for the hose distance if a vehicle came down to the end of Rose Gardens, and just to make sure that all elements of the buildings can be reached within 45 metres, and that's not a straight diagonal line going through the building, that's going sort of round the building effectively. There is also obviously, as shown, the access point to the north with regards to those garages as well, and building regs will be looking at that, but that was one of the concerns that was raised by residents. I just want to draw attention to the point about fencing. So you won't be able to see the annotation here, which is talking about a 900mm fence to run alongside that footpath. Again, you can see that footpath that runs around here that is outside of the extent of the site, so that will not be compromised by the proposal. So in terms of the design, the front elevation doesn't actually have a door on it, so it's the left-hand side image is what's facing that parking area. So it's render at ground floor and a normal roof above. We'll look at specifically those two Velux windows because what's been mentioned is concerns that they would result in overlooking to the neighbour at number 47 and onwards. The side elevation, so these are the elevations that face the neighbouring property to the south that has got the approval for the extension. So you see the design of the dwellings is that it would appear from a bungalow at the front with a low eaves height to then include some first floor accommodation, and then at the rear there is a dormer window. So the first floor is clad, both the dormer and the return elevations are clad with cedar cladding. So in terms of the floor plans for these dwellings, so you've got the ground floor plan on the left-hand side, so you can see the entrance doors are at the side of the side of the bungalows. It's not considered that causes, I suppose, it to look incongruous in the street. These are relatively unassuming buildings, even though they've got first floor accommodation. And we'll look at the relationship with the neighbouring property in terms of height in a second. Two-bed dwellings, you've got a roof light serving the front bedroom. The officers referred to that in the report to look at whether or not that's adequate outlook. It is often the case that you have bedrooms in roof spaces which obviously have outlook through Velux windows. It's not considered to be, again, detrimental in terms of the quality of accommodation that's being created with the primary bedroom at the rear with a full normal height window. Just to confirm that point, this you can see on the left-hand side of this section the dormer window, and then at the front you can see the Velux windows that are the east windows that face towards 47. This demonstrates that on the section that the sill height of that window is 1.7 metres above finished floor level. So in our view, you cannot overlook the gardens of those properties. You are simply looking up and out. In terms of the street scene then, so the top street scene is showing it in relation to the dwelling at number 49, so the one that has consent for a rear extension. You can see there's a change in level across the site, which is the dotted line, so there is going to be some excavation to try and take the height of that dwelling down. It's not considered that the relationship between the dwellings on either side is obtrusive. The bottom image there just shows the relationship with number 47. So the gap where the fence is here is where the footpath is that I've been mentioning. So again, you can see how height-wise it's actually lower in ridge than the neighbouring property. And as well, whilst there are bungalows in the immediate vicinity, there are two-storey properties in the road, and this wouldn't result in a visual harm looking at the wider character nor in the immediate vicinity of the site in our view. So overall, the development is not considered to have caused harm to the character appearance of the area or living conditions of neighbours. Just to look at this image, in terms of the footprint here to the south, this is a ground floor extension to this property, which has been approved, that shows the extent to which there will be development that's occurring in this area because of the relationship between where these these dwellings are sited is further back from that front building line. So there's always a concern that actually you're going not quite full, well, you're not going full 2-storey, but you're going 1.5 stories, and putting that in that relationship with the neighbour could cause harm. But in this instance, there is an extant permission. It is effectively, the fencing has already gone up and it's progressing. So there is no harm, in our view, caused to the neighbouring property from this proposal. It is also set away from the dwelling as it is at the moment. There is a gap to the boundary as well, and as mentioned, it's not a full 2-storey height. It is lower, as shown from the elevations, and you can see the elevation here. So overall, we don't have concerns with regards to the character and appearance of the area or living conditions. KCC Highways are now satisfied by the proposal. The recommendation, therefore, is to defer and delegate for approval, subject to the UU for the SPA contribution. Mention it's been made of that unilateral has been submitted already. That will just need to be checked to ensure that it gives us the legal security, but obviously it's still being approved. It would be approved on the basis of that being acceptable. But there are safeguarding conditions, and to very quickly just touch on those, there's one particular one that I did want to mention, as well as the standard conditions with regards to drainage and landscaping. There is condition 4, which is specifically for the requirement for a construction management plan and details of that to be submitted. Because we are at the end of the cul-de-sac, you do have a relationship with neighbouring properties that we need to manage. And therefore there are a number of provisos of what we would require to see: timing of deliveries, wheel washing facilities, routing of construction vehicles, parking and turning areas, etc. So we do think it's important to put that condition on as well. There's also condition 11, where permitted development rights are being taken away for windows to be inserted in the front elevation, which is the eastern elevation, at first floor level, because it wouldn't require planning permission to put windows in there. So that's why that permitted development right has been removed. But overall, the proposal is recommended to defer and delegate for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. So, do I have any speakers? Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we're only looking at 2 stories here, which, as been pointed out, is not totally out of keeping with the area. I think there are 2 good additions to the housing supply. The highways issues have been addressed. I'd like to support this application.
Councillor Uzeki.
Yeah, I'd like to support it also. I think it looks like a neat little development. Only 2 properties. Yeah, looks like a good development to me. Thank you.
Councillor Wing.
I don't really have a problem with the development at all. I mean, obviously that building's going to encroach on the new building, so it swings and roundabouts. But I'm glad there will be a construction management plan, because we're building in an area where there are a significant number of elderly people. Then obviously they get very concerned, and obviously sometimes there's an element of inertia. They don't like change. So I would say here publicly, while the applicant is here, that due consideration going forward needs to be considered of those neighbours, particularly in light of the possibility that some of them may believe that they've been dealt with aggressively because of objecting. So, it's always tight. It's a tight site. There's going to be noise, there's going to be vibrations, but certainly trying to get that a proper construction management plan that is in the context of the environment, not just in terms of the tight location, but also there's a lot of elderly people there as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? In that case, we'll now put the motion for the officer's recommendation for deferral and delegate to the vote. Those in favour? Was that 100%? That's carried, thank you. Right. Next agenda item is land to the north of Fairlawn Road and the west of Northwood Road, Broadstairs. Firstly, public speaking in favour of the application is Ms Nicola Coles. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant, Knight Lodge Construction. The development proposed through this full planning application relates to an allocated housing site and will enable the delivery of 38 sustainably located dwellings. Through constructive discussions with council officers, the proposal has undergone an iterative design process, resulting in a reduced number of dwellings from 44 to 38. At this reduced density, the development exhibits a softer, less engineered layout. It is agreed with officers that this strikes an appropriate balance between meeting the national objective of making efficient use of land, whilst making opportunities for landscaping and biodiversity enhancement and creating a high-quality environment for residents. The notional capacity for this allocation is identified within the Council's development plan as 45 dwellings. The allocation also includes land to the south of the application site that has recently secured permission for housing. Collectively, the proposed developments would equate to 41 dwellings across the total allocation, therefore falling below the Council's estimated capacity. On-site trees, protected by a recent preservation order, are to be retained and safeguarded. The proposed landscape master plan includes a generous native tree planting strategy of over 60 individual specimens. This will further enhance the character and appearance of the site, and its effectiveness can be heightened through the appropriate management regime. The Council's arboricultural officer is supportive of the proposed strategy. We are also pleased to report that working with the Council's housing officers, the application includes a policy-compliant quantum of on-site affordable housing, which comprises a mix of first homes and social rented. All other developer contributions, as reported on page 157 of the agenda, are to be met through the completion of a legal agreement. This will ensure that the development meets the relevant social infrastructure requirements. Responses from statutory consultees have revealed no technical constraints to development. Officers are satisfied that the layout is compatible with neighbouring buildings and spaces. A construction management plan will ensure that the construction phase is appropriately managed in the interest of residential amenity. This is a fully policy-compliant housing development that will realise the sustainable objectives of both national and local planning policy. Members are therefore respectfully invited to support their officer's recommendation as set out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Speaking against the application is Mr. Steve Smith. 3 minutes.
I've been given 3 minutes to slot to emphasise my objections, but with a major project like this one is proposed, I find it very difficult. But what I can do is I can just state a few statements. I've just listened to what's come across there, and it all sounds very credible. But take yourself back to when this application first was put in. It was quite easy to say, yes, we'll build 45 properties. What you didn't, nobody told you was, well, there was cedar trees there, 100 years old. Consequently, they were all cut down. Why? To make room for 14 or 15 detached houses. Everybody in Northwood Road in Broadstairs was up in arms. We contacted the planning and anybody else that would possibly listen. All of a sudden, a TPO is issued. A bit late, because all the trees are now cut down. The only ones that stayed were the ones that they thought they could just get a road round there. Which brings me to my next point. A road, an access road. By their own documents, it clearly shows that a dust cart could not get in there without crossing over to the other side of the road in Northwood Road. Once that vehicle is in this, we'll call it an estate, there is no way in a month of Sundays could any other vehicle, of which there's going to be possibly over 100, get in or out of that estate. One of the properties, I think they call it H3, this has been put on the eastern side of the premises, and it overlooks my house. The back wall would be approximately 13 feet from my little veranda at the back of my house, with first floor windows overlooking my property. I bought this house 30 years ago, and I didn't expect to have a house, or in some of the drawings they've got 2 properties there. Trying to tell me it's 2 small bungalows. Well, a bungalow in my age was a single-storey building, not going up to the first floor with windows overlooking my property. The whole thing is a disaster. The access and the egress to the property on their drawings is indicating somewhat 10 metres wide. True facts is 4.8 metres wide. That doesn't include any paving or anything like that for pedestrians. Plus, there's a dirty grey telegraph pole right slap bang in the middle of it. How the council has allowed this to get to this stage, I do not know. The entirety of Northwood Road has complained about it. The wildlife, the trees, everything has been totally decimated. You had a bat report. They turned up there. They turned up to check for bats in the cedar trees. They've reported within that report, oh, well, unfortunately, the cedar trees have all been cut down. The whole thing has been a disaster from start to finish. I sent letters to Mrs. Fibbins. I've had no response whatsoever. There's been no correspondence to the public at all. The whole thing is disgusting. I could go on for another hour, but I'll stop at that.
I do need you to wind up, please. Thank you. Next speaking against the application is Mrs. Margaret Bennett-Goodman. You also have 3 minutes, please.
Right. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I would say I've already submitted 3 responses.
Can you put your microphone on?
Thank you. I've already submitted 3 responses, so this is number 4, and it's in a way a summary because the others are very detailed. I'm objecting to the proposed development for 2 main reasons: the development itself and the effect it will have on the environment and surrounding area. The single access, often partly obscured by parked cars, is a major concern for all residents in the area. The potential for horrendous accidents is considerable in spite of the opinions raised by Considine in their report. This single access also has a significant impact on the development itself and on those people who might live there. These 38 dwellings will accommodate between 107 and 186 people. It is generally accepted that when a large number of people live in close proximity, it often gives rise to social tension. Here, it is further exacerbated by the fact that it is completely enclosed and hidden from view. Whether the parking allocation will be sufficient to prevent neighbour disputes of this kind is doubtful. The development provides for the statutory allocation of affordable housing. This too could cause tension. The size and appearance of these dwellings provides a very obvious distinction between the haves and the have-nots. An enclosed development can also create the possibility for criminal activities. There's already been a significant drugs bust at 129 Northwood Road earlier this year. If this should be the case, it would be extremely difficult to report it, as the complainant could be easily identified. Any police surveillance would be very obvious. Vehicles from the development on Northwood Road will additionally impact the Margate Road and Westwood Road, causing the current gridlocks to extend even further. Once the 80 dwellings at Thanet Reach are built, with another possible 120 cars, the gridlock will be permanent. Previously, I said that the development is hidden from view and untoward activities could take place in secret. The developer himself proved this last year by felling a number of trees contrary to the conditions imposed in the relevant documentation. Fortunately, complaints made to the planning team stopped the felling. This also shows he does not care much about the environment. The landscape design shows a substantial amount of new planting. That outside the curtilages is to be maintained by a management company. TDC Council's tree strategy states that trees must be maintained until maturity, which, according to the RHS, is 2 to 3 seasons. Remaining trees must be maintained by the owners. How will TDC enforce this if necessary? Unfortunately, 30% of newly planted trees die within the first year. There is every possibility that this will occur here, reducing the calming and softening effect on this urban, rather utilitarian development, and the potential for the removal of harmful exhaust particles from traffic in the whole area. The CCG believes that £38,196 will mitigate the impact of this development on the delivery of general practice in this area, which is debatable. I've already commented in great deal on this issue in both my previous responses, but I want to make crystal clear that, as the NHS knows, Thanet is the worst area in the country for attracting doctors to surgeries and practices, and it is doctors that are desperately needed. Rick Everett wants to attract new people to Thanet, which is very laudable, but earlier this year he said the infrastructure was overwhelmed. So perhaps he could explain how developments of this size, plus those at Thanet Reach and Parsons Rose, could improve the situation. Please think past the new housing bonus. I'm not against any development of the site, although the single access will always be a major concern unless it's a gated development.
To wrap up, please.
Just a few more sentences. I would love to see a development where the developers thought through about people who will actually live there, and the architects who naturally want to push the boundaries of design consider that most people do not want their boundaries pushed. Unfortunately, this is still very much overdeveloped, and as such it will have a negative impact on the area. P.S. Does the developer know about solar panels?
Thank you. I now pass to the Principal Planning Officer, Emma, to outline the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. The application site is outlined in red here. So to the bottom of this slide is Fairlawn Road. On the right-hand side is Northwood Road. At this point here is the existing access into the site. The site's an undeveloped piece of land. Historically, it's been used as an orchard. There's 2 existing buildings on the site, and the site is edge of town centre, with the edge of Westwood Town Centre being to the left of this slide. So this is an aerial view of the site. So again, you can see the access coming into the site from Northwood Road in this location here. The boundary of the site runs along here, where you can see an existing hedge line, and runs along this location here. And to the left of the screen, you can see the existing retail units in the town centre. And again, you can see Fairlawn Road to the bottom of this slide. You can see the existing pattern of development of properties in Northwood Road, which range in size and design. So you can see there's pairs of semi-detached properties, and there's also a range of also terrace units you can see in this location here as well. This again is a view then looking towards Northwood Road, so just showing the rears of the existing properties that were back onto the eastern boundary of the site. So you can see in this location here they are bungalows, but many of those have extended at roof level to create first floor accommodation. And on the left hand side you can see there's existing 2-storey properties that back onto the site. On the right hand side you can see that there's an existing bungalow which would be just south of the access. So the application site extends into this location here, so this existing building and this existing building would be demolished as part of the proposal. So this is just a plan showing the local plan and the housing allocation for the site. So the hashed brown area is the housing allocation. The application site boundary runs along here, so you can see the darker brown line is the application site that runs along in this location here, and to the bottom of this area is the adjacent site. So the boundary of this site extends along a line here, and to the south of this, members will remember you've seen a few times the application to the end of Fairlawn Road, which has come before you, and there's been approval for 6 houses, and then more recently for 3 houses in this location here. This area to the north is also allocated housing site. This hasn't yet come in as an application to us. On the left again you can see the blue is the town centre, and then you can see that this is Millennium Way running along the top of the site here. So again, just another aerial view, just so you can see the whole site in context. So this, everything south of Millennium Way is allocated housing. It's split into 2 housing allocations. So the housing allocation for this site is for a notional 45 dwellings, and as mentioned, approval's already been granted for 6 and then subsequently for 3 units in this location here. That would come within that 45 unit allocation, and then there's a further allocation for additional units here, but that falls obviously outside this application. So these are just some photos showing you the site. This is the existing access into the site from Northwood Road. So you can see in the distance there the 2 existing buildings to be demolished. And then this is just another view, so you can see Northwood Road, and this is the access on the right hand side here, and you can just see there's a range of property styles and types in the road. So there's a mix of semi-detached, detached, terrace units, 2-storey, single-storey, so the real mix of different style properties. But this site itself is set back from the road. It wouldn't necessarily be seen in the context of the existing properties. It's quite a secluded site. This is inside the site looking back towards Northwood Road, so Northwood Road is in this location here. Again, you can see the existing buildings to be removed, and you can now start seeing some of the trees running along the boundary of the site. And again, just another view there. So again, Northwood Road over in this location here. Fairlawn is to the right-hand side. And then again, this is again the neighbouring properties behind these existing trees. So these trees are proposed to be retained as part of the application. And then this is now looking again towards the eastern boundary, but now moving towards the northern boundary of the site. So you can see just beyond here, an application was approved for a care home, so that's currently under construction just beyond this northern boundary. And again, just showing the existing hedgerow. So along the northern boundary, they're looking to retain existing hedgerow. And then just again, another view looking towards Fairlawn Road. And again, the Fairlawn Road being in that location there. And again there. So this, just to start with the issues regarding the trees. So the application did come in a few years ago, and following its submission, there was some felling of trees on the site. So at the time of felling, no trees were protected, so there was nothing unlawful that took place on the site. Obviously, we would have been keen to have assessed the trees through this application and looked at that through the proposal, but it's inevitable that some trees would have needed to have been removed given the fact this is an allocated housing site in order to fit the number of units on which are allocated within the policy in order to secure our housing requirement for the district. We need to make sure we're securing the numbers that we're trying to allocate these sites for. So to do that, we would have expected to see some loss of trees on the site. So the trees that have been removed are in this location here. So there was a run of trees running through the centre of the site. There was a tree in this location here, which, as you can see, would have needed to be removed in order to achieve access into the site. And then these areas to the left aren't really mature trees. They were more sort of hedgerow style, smaller trees. So there was nothing really of any substance in this location here. So the trees that we have since looked at, and I've been on site with the arboriculture officer to assess the trees, are along this boundary. This tree here is the one that you saw in the photos, which is quite a large, mature sycamore that we're very keen to see retained. And there was two other trees along this boundary, and then the tree along the northern boundary that we were also very keen to see retained. And so following that site visit, we did place a TPO on those trees for retention, and they are shown to be retained through this application. So this is just showing the TPO map for the TPO tree. So those 4 trees are to be retained. So the application was initially submitted for 44 units. This is the block plan of the application that was submitted. The proposal included a flat block on the bottom left-hand corner of the site, and the rest of the development you can see was a mix of semi-detached units, and they're all quite close to each other, and within the centre of the site they're all quite close to the frontage, so there wasn't much space around the units. Concern was raised with the density of this development, and it was recommended that the number was reduced, especially in order to look at replacement trees to overcome the loss of trees that had taken place on the site. So the proposal is now for 38 units, so it's dropped in 6 units, and this is now the proposed layout. So the layout is looking at a flat block to the centre of the site, and then round the edge of the site is a mix of houses. They range in height 2 to 3 storey. All of the rear eaves level are 2 storeys, so some of the front just have some gable frontages with second floor windows. But you can see in terms of the layout, they're all set back. There's garden spaces to the front. The flat block in the middle has quite a lot of landscaping around it with quite a spacious setting. You can see areas of again, soft landscaping in front of it, just creating amenity space. So as you enter the site, you would be facing towards the flat block, which would be a feature building to the centre of the site. In terms of parking, all of the units are provided with 2 parking spaces, other than the flats, which have 1 parking space, and there's 8 visitor parking spaces also proposed. In terms of the actual access, so it's using the existing access into the site, and then a loop road is being created that runs round, but it doesn't fully extend round, so vehicles would have to turn to come back out again. So there's pedestrian and cycle access the whole way round, but vehicles would be forced to turn, and this is in order to slow down vehicles. It's a shared surface that's being created around the site with the aim of reducing vehicle speeds. So in terms of the unit styles, that is quite a modern design, although everything is pitched roof to try and be in keeping with the surrounding area. So I'm just going to show you a few of the unit styles that are proposed. So this is one of them with a gable frontage. You can see this one does have second floor windows at the front, but at the rear it's 2-storey. You can see that most of them have floor-to-ceiling glazing. There's a mix of materials used on them, including white render, timber cladding, and a mix of bricks and aluminium windows. This is a small bungalow which is towards the front of the site. And then again, another variation for different unit styles. Again, just a gable frontage there with a glazing. And this is again is another type. So this is more the terrace units of this style that run along the western boundary of the site. And again, another one, but slightly wider. So those were the terrace units run along the left, and then along the north we've got the detached units. The bungalow that you just saw is in the bottom right-hand corner. That's there because the building that fronts onto Northwood Road is also a bungalow, so we need to have quite a small-scale building in order to avoid any overlooking to the neighbours. So now just to show you the elevations for the flat block, which is in the centre of the site. So this is the development of the flat block. So it's 2 to 3 stories in height. Whilst it's quite a large building, it is very much broken down into these 3 different elements. You can see the frontage shows the floor to ceiling glazing with some setback balcony areas. And these side elevations, you can see the interesting roof form. Because they're in the centre of the site, it's going to be visible from everywhere you look. So it's very important to make sure that every elevation is has interest, and you can see that each elevation does that. There's lots of openings on each side. There's a mix of materials, and just the roof form creates quite an interesting building shape that is considered to be quite an interesting feature building towards the centre. This is just another set of images that are provided of the perspective views of that building. And these are just the floor plans showing them. So these units have the flats in it, so two bed flats on each floor. And then you can see that's the 3-storey element there. So these are some street elevations showing how the buildings would look. So this is the southern boundary. So you can see the bungalow just as you enter the site, and then you can see the 2-storey buildings that run along there. So again, interesting range where you've got the gables and then the hitch roof properties. Then this is the terrace block, which runs along the western boundary of the site. And then the top one here again shows the detached units that run along the northern boundary of the site. And then the bottom one here is the properties that back onto the existing properties in Northwood Road. So again, these were amended because originally they did have some upper level windows in the rear. So again, in order to avoid neighbours, these have been amended, but they are 3-storey at the front looking into the site. In terms of materials and hard surfacing, this is the hard surfacing plan, just showing that all of the hard surfacing would be permeable paving, so there's no tarmac within the site. So it's just 4 different styles of paving that would run around, creating quite a nice environment. And then this is the landscaping plan. So this is a landscaping master plan, so it's not the full plan. The full plan would be submitted via condition. But what this shows is the intentions for new planting within the site and existing retention of planting. So you can see the existing TPO trees running along the eastern boundary of the site, and again along the north here, the existing TPO tree. You can see there's lots of new tree planting within the site. So again, to the front of the flat blocks, to the rear, these are all amenity spaces. So everything outside the dotted yellow line would be communal amenity space, which would be looked after under the landscape management plan. And so where there sometimes are concerns that planting falls within curtilage of properties and therefore wouldn't be protected into the future, this would be protected because it doesn't fall within those curtilage, and we could protect it through the landscape management plan. So all of these are amenity spaces to the front here, and as you enter the site, either side are all in that space. And as you can see as well, just general frontages of properties, whilst parking is provided, they've all managed to achieve small front gardens as well. Along the western boundary, there's some existing hedgerow, but the arboricultural officer suggested that maybe a replacement of that with some more native species would be an improvement, so that's been proposed. In terms of ecology, obviously there has been some loss of sort of habitat through some clearance of the trees and things on the site. Under the ecology side of things, an assessment was submitted which looked at all the protected species within the site. There was nothing identified as being present within the site at all. KCC have looked at it and just have recommended an ecological impact assessment is submitted via condition. But as part of this landscaping master plan, they are proposing to provide timber log piles, bug hotels, bat boxes and bird boxes within the site, which will help to help with ecological enhancements within the site. So KCC Biodiversity have no concerns with it. In terms of the impact on neighbours, so this plan here, you can see the outline of the most recently approved neighbouring development, which was for 3 houses. So these were 2 bungalows on the right-hand side, and this was a 2-storey dwelling here. So these properties would back onto these properties. So when considering both applications, I've been looking at the potential impact from neighbours to one another. From this application, we've been looking at window placements to make sure that there's minimum overlooking to these properties. And again, on the right-hand side, you'll end up with a bungalow next to these 2 bungalows here, which again, in terms of relationship, there would be...
No interruptions, please.
In terms of relationship, there'd be no first floor windows overlooking between these units. So in terms of distance, currently from the proposed rear elevation of these proposed dwellings to the nearest existing property in Fairlawn Road, obviously not these because they're not currently constructed, there's a distance of 34 metres, so there's no existing neighbours that would be affected, and as I said, consideration has been given to this scheme that has already been approved, which is a material consideration. In terms of the impact on properties in Northwood Road, as you can see, in terms of the relationship, the greatest distance is to the units to the north of this slide. So you can see this is the greatest distance. This is a distance of 42 metres from the rear of this property to the rear of this property in Northwood Road. The closest relationship is from this unit here to numbers 76 and 78. There's a distance of 25 metres to the rear conservatory of number 78, which is the closest property, and then 30 metres to the main dwelling. So given this distance, this exceeds the distance that we usually consider to be acceptable for overlooking. On top of that, we also have the retention of the trees through the TPO, which will help with screening. And also we've removed permitted development rights to allow for any alterations at roof level that could provide for any additional second floor windows that would face towards those neighbours. So given all those things, it's considered the impact on privacy of these neighbours is acceptable. In terms of the vehicular impact, these plans are submitted just showing turning into the site, so 2.4 by 43 metre visibility space can be achieved to the access, achieving a safe access into the site. A footpath would extend into the site as well, creating safe movement for pedestrians. And then these plans show turning of waste vehicles into the site, which highways have raised no concerns with. So these are 30-metre vehicles showing that they can go into the site and move around the loop, turn and come back out again. So highways have raised no concerns with the access or with the layout. And in terms of vehicle movements, they've said that there won't be an severe impact on the highway, with the proposed development looking to provide on average only 1 additional vehicle movement per 3 minutes. In terms of affordable housing, 30% is proposed, which includes 70% affordable rent and 30% first homes, with a good mix of unit types proposed. All financial contributions are being secured through a legal agreement, which we will wait to be submitted, but all of heads of terms for that have been agreed. And just in terms of drainage, the proposal is to connect onto the existing combined sewer in Northwood Road. Southern Water have said there is capacity for both surface water and foul drainage onto that combined sewer, although there is some preference from KCC for infiltration, and that can come later though through a condition submission. So it is recommended it be deferred and delegated for approval. It's subject to the legal agreement coming in and the safeguarding conditions, but it is recommended for this on the basis that it's a sustainable site, edge centre, allocated housing site, and therefore the social and economic benefits of this scheme are considered to outweigh the environmental harm. And as you can see from the landscaping, there's lots of mitigation that is proposed to try and deal with the concerns that residents have raised regarding the loss of the trees and the habitat. So the recommendation is to defer and delegate. Thank you.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. I have Councillor Garner first.
Thank you. Yeah, I called this planning application in about 2 years ago, I think, when it was initially raised, because I had a number of significant concerns at that time about the loss of trees, potential loss of trees, the potential impact on biodiversity, And over the last couple of years, see that impact has been, a lot of that impact has already been realised. So we've lost a lot of the trees, and as we've heard, a lot of the wildlife that did live there has already gone. Now the concerns, significant concerns that I think the local residents have outlined stem from what I consider to be an overcrowded, overdeveloped plan. Firstly, I mean, I accept and acknowledge this is land allocated for housing, as is stated in the local plan. But that isn't the end of it. We've already seen that over the iterations of this plan application, the number of houses on here has been reduced from 45 to now 38, and I think there's still a way to go before this is an acceptable development. I just want to highlight a couple of areas where this overcrowding and overdevelopment has impacted, and the first of these is with the highway solution. As you can see, I'm glad we've got this picture up. Those of us who live locally, most of us were familiar with Northwood Road. Those of us who might represent the neighbouring ward will know this road has become busier and busier, with more parking along that road over the years, and this development is going to make that even worse. And I don't think there has been enough consideration about this. And in fact, I've looked through the various KCC highways reports on this, and they've raised a number of significant concerns over each iteration, including visitor parking bays not being enough, the design inappropriate for a suburban location, and they in fact have said that vehicle movements are going to be higher than that which would normally be permitted by the Kent design guidelines. And I think this is still the case. And in fact, we've now been left with a bit of a haphazard waiting for an accident to happen type design. We've got a single entrance. I went and had a look at it today. That entrance to that site, which will be the only access point for anybody in a car, on a bike, a pedestrian, an emergency vehicle, a refuse vehicle, any person will have to access through that single site onto Northwood Road. The larger vehicles will need to swing out to the other side of the road to get in. It's a shared surface, so there's minimal or limited delimitation between where you walk, where you cycle, where you drive. I mean, I couldn't quite make head or tail of it in terms of where the markings are for which vehicle and which pedestrian, which cyclist can go where, and it doesn't even go all the way round. I think it's a bit of a disaster waiting to happen myself. The other impact that this overcrowding and overdeveloped site potentially will have is on biodiversity. And again, I've read through all of the reports attached to the planning application, and in fact KCC biodiversity have over the years raised a number of concerns about this, and at one point they highlighted the fact that actually there potentially isn't going to be any net gain in biodiversity here. I mean, that picture does look very green. There is some nice green bits on there, but in fact this is going to be a net biodiversity loss as far as I can see and as far as I'm concerned. There's a loss of all current habitats on site as has happened, and I think there are actually minimal green spaces being developed there. And as you can just see by comparing the gardens and the land around the houses on Northwood Road with the houses and blocks on the site, they're smaller. The gardens are smaller, I mean, it's nice to see there is a bit of a front garden, but it's smaller. And the one other area I wanted to mention, which was mentioned, which was the clinical commissioning group submission, which they said there's going to be 107 new patient registrations, and therefore Mocketts Wood, Summerhill, Newington Road, Dashwood Medical and the Grange surgeries, which are, I think, acknowledged to already be overcrowded, and I realise there's not a lot we can necessarily do about that. But this is another one. I compared it with the British Gas site application that we approved last year, which is going to see 156 new patients going to Mocketts Wood, St Peters and Northdown. Now, this isn't something necessarily that we can deal with here in this meeting, but it's something that we all need to be aware of, that our doctors are becoming, our GP surgeries are becoming more and more and more overcrowded. So, I mean, I do have significant concerns about this, and I share them with the Broadstairs and St Peters Town Council, who had significant concerns about the overdevelopment of this site and recommended refusal. Ramsgate Town Council had similar concerns about overdevelopment, and they recommend refusal, as did the Broadstairs Society. So, I mean, I'm obviously interested to hear how other people think these significant overdevelopment concerns are being tackled here, but I'm going to struggle to approve this. It's a housing site, it needs houses on it, but this is the wrong design, I think, and I probably will vote against this and ask for them to come back with a much better design for us to consider and potentially approve. So thank you.
Just to come back on a few of those points, I just want to sort of emphasise, you're mentioning quite a few times about the number of units and overcrowding, but just to remind members, this is an edge of centre site. Whilst it is in quite a suburban location, it lies adjacent to the town centre, and in terms of distance to reach the town centre, it's edge of town centre, although highways have classed it as suburban. But in terms of density, it's 29 dwellings per hectare, so it is actually very low density. In town centres, we would expect a lot higher. Edge of centres, also quite high. So at 29 dwellings per hectare, this is actually quite low density. And also it falls below the number we've sought to allocate it for within the local plan. So in terms of overcrowding, in our view, it achieves what we're looking for in terms of the allocation, and it is suitable in this location, given the size of the plots. I mean, you've mentioned size of gardens, they are 10 to 15 metres in depth, which is pretty standard for a garden. And we've got a real range of mix of units here with quite a few detached units. So it is in keeping with the pattern of surrounding development in our view. Just something I failed to mention, I've just realised, where you mentioned about the only access point being onto Northwood Road, is that they are actually also proposing a pedestrian link in the north point of this slide. So this would be looking to go through the adjacent housing allocation site up to Millennium Way to provide direct pedestrian and cycle links to the town centre. So that would be in this location here, cutting through. Obviously it is dependent upon the neighbouring scheme coming in and also looking at that connection, but that's our intention, is to try and improve connections with the town centre. And then in terms of the other points you've mentioned, you said about net biodiversity net gain. There's not actually been an assessment in terms of whether there's biodiversity net gain on this site or not, but as you can see there is a lot of greenery. I mean, yes, we've lost some trees, but they are proposing a lot of replacement trees, with up to 60 provided through the condition requiring the planting plan to come in, along with other ecological enhancements. And whilst this application has been in for a long time, and therefore there's lots of references to concerns from KCC Biodiversity and KCC Highways in the comments, at this moment in time they now have no objections. With the plans that are before you, they have no objections to, and consider the access to be safe and the turning areas to be safe and the number of parking spaces to be adequate. So I feel that does sort of hopefully address your concerns with that.
Yeah, thank you. One thing I did want to add about highways, the final comments in the report did seem a bit incomplete, because it said we're happy with this as long as the conditions are implemented, but it didn't then say what the conditions were. So I did have a look in their letter dated the 23rd of October from a few weeks ago, and I think there were nine conditions listed in there, which I couldn't see them all in the conditions in the report, at the top of the report. There seemed to be a few missing.
I did query that one, and I was reassured that it is in the conditions. Can we note which one it is?
If we let the debate go forward, what we'll do is we'll just come back on that, because I believe that there are informatives on there which aren't specifically necessarily conditions, but there are standard informatives that we put on any permission when it involves any interaction with the highway, so we can clarify that point.
Councillor Matterface.
Thank you. My question is much shorter than my comment. I know it's an allocated site. Mrs. Fibbins mentioned the number allocated is more than what's actually, gosh, I'm losing my voice, more than this report. How many was it actually allocated for in the approved local plan?
It's the notional allocation, so we've basically carried out an assessment, probably, I assume, usually it's based on 30 dwellings per hectare, so the notional number for allocation is 45, but that includes this site and the site below. So if you were taking the 3 units that have most recently been approved on the site below, that would mean that we'd be looking for up to 41 units, ideally, on this site, and they're obviously proposing 38.
Councillor Moore.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Garner's quite admirably raised the concerns that I had. But just nitpicking, we keep saying the town centre. It's not the town centre. Nowhere near the town centre. You're talking Westwood Cross, I think, and we need to make sure we're talking about the right thing, because I don't think the town centre's moved since I've lived here.
Yeah, just to confirm, we mean the town centre of Westwood Cross. It's designated as a town centre in the local plan and has been since the previous local plan. So when we say the town centre, we're not talking about Broadstairs, we're talking about Westwood Cross, just to be clear on that.
Sorry, this is just showing that, so the blue is the town centre, that's allocated town centre in the local plan.
Councillor Wing.
Thank you, Chair. Is there an elevation of the block, the 3-storey block in the middle, in context of the rest of it around it? Because I think I possibly missed that, or there wasn't one.
No, there isn't. It's not part of the street elevation. So the street elevations went around each of the houses, and then this is in the centre. So
that's quite, because I would have liked to have seen the impact of that extra storey on the view. Obviously, you've got a circle round, and if I'm this side of the circle looking across it, across that lot, I would have liked to have seen how these buildings here view in terms of a cross section through the site. So I'm a bit disappointed that view isn't there for me to look at. And also the allocation of social housing, what percentage is it?
So we've got 30% affordable housing being proposed, and of that there would be 70% affordable rent and then 30% first homes.
Could you identify them on the site plan, please? Sorry, Emma, it's very late for me to be asking you this question. It must be useful in future if we already have this marked on that diagram to save a bit of time.
It's the ones on the on the western side. So this
I was
terraces.
going to make a guess that it was those ones based on those units being the smaller units, and I find that. I mean, I don't know what word to use. I wanted to use the word offensive, that a development, I think one of the residents who objected mentioned the haves and the have-nots. And, it would be really lovely to see a developer give affordable housing at the same size, standard and quality as the rest of the houses on whatever the development is. It would also be really great if particularly the social housing had solar panels so that we can try and reduce the cost, fuel bills of people who maybe aren't as fortunate as many of us to own their own housing. So I find that really disappointing. We constantly look at developments where the social housing is stuffed in a corner away from the rest, and it's just socially divisive. So I need to see the elevation of the bit across the middle, and I'd also like to see those social houses actually represent the size and quality of the quality's probably there, but certainly look the same as a similar, or even be dispersed amongst the development so that we don't have this division.
Just to come back on that point, so in terms of the size of the units, the affordable units, there's 4 one-bed, 4 two-bed and 3 three-bed units. So there is a range of size of units. Obviously, they all meet the space standards because they all have to meet the space standards that's set out with policy and national guidance. Of 2 of those units as well were wheelchair adaptable units, so that is also being provided. So yes, they're terraced and there's not a mix in terms of the type of housing, but in terms of sizes, they would all be meeting minimum space standards, and they've got adequate depth gardens, they've all got the same amount of parking.
I sort of understand that, but just looking at that site, there's less space for those buildings than there are the rest of the buildings. I'd also really love to see an overlay. If we could overlay the waste vehicle access on top of this one, and we all know, because we all live in a high density area, that we have cars parked all over the place, and I don't think the waste vehicle will get round if there's a few parked cars out on the street, and that is definitely going to happen. So I also have real concerns about our waste teams or anybody else being able to access that safely. I don't know how they manage most of the time in a lot of our areas, but you know, we need to make it as easy as possible for them. So, you know, a couple of parked cars and that vehicle isn't going to get round.
Do I have any other question? Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. I originally felt this did seem like overcrowding, but having listened and seen the report, I feel it's probably sustainable.
Councillor Bayford, could you pull your microphone towards you a little
Sorry,
bit?
yep, sorry. Right. I have to say, I think we would struggle to defend an appeal if we go against this. And I also think we need to be a little bit careful what we wish for, because it is designated for housing. I'm not sure that we're going to get anything that is more pleasing. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? In that case, I'm going to say it, carry on my pages. We put the motion for the officer's recommendation for a deferral to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? Any abstentions? That's carried, thank you. Right. That concludes the public speaking for this meeting. Now, Councillor Rattigan, I know you need to leave, but before you do, are there any remaining items on the list that you wish to reserve for debate? Thank you.
I guess not.
No, I'm just waiting for him to go. Okay, I will now call upon the clerk to read out the remaining planning applications. If any member wishes to reserve an application, will they please call out as the clerk reads? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So we have AO3, 5 Broad Street, Ramsgate. AO6, 60 Northumberland Avenue, Margate.
AO7, 12 The Bell Alliance Square, Ramsgate, and AO8, Margate Harbour Arms Stone Pier, Margate. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a proposer to move that the applications that have not been reserved be determined in accordance with the officer's recommendations? Councillor Alban and Councillor Rattigan.
He's out, Councillor Rattigan.
Sorry?
Do you mean Rizeki? I think you meant Rizeki.
Rizeki, sorry. Sorry.
Do members agree?
Do members agree? Thank you very much. So for the benefit of the public, I will now call upon the clerk to read out the applications that have been determined.
Thank you, Chair. So that's AO3, AO3 5 Broad Street, Ramsgate, AO6 60 Northumberland Avenue, Margate, AO7 12 The Bell Alliance Square, Ramsgate, and AO8 Margate Harbour Arms Stone Pier, Margate. Thank you.
Right, thank you. And for members of the committee, just an additional item. Mr. Livingstone has something he wishes to say.
Thank you, members. I won't keep you very long. It's just, hopefully you'll have received an invite for some training at the end of the month. Just please, if you could, either, if you haven't already, accept it, or if there are issues and you can't attend either of those two sessions, please do let us know, and we'll try and accommodate as best as we can before the committees in December. Thank you.
And just a reminder about the site visit will be at 9:30. On the, whatever, the 1st of December, Friday the 1st of December. Thank you. And that concludes the meeting. 9:30.